Tonight's show is called United Center We Stand. There's my face. That's a face.
Of course, babe. Let's get started then. The United Center We Stand is going to be amazing.
It's amazing. Oh,
Is everything
it's
okay?
amazing. Yes, everything's great. Lilybell's here too. We're trying a bologna sandwich with cheese on it and
That's not
mayonnaise.
exactly what I expected. But it's like this.
Yes, bologna sandwich with American cheese and mayonnaise.
You've added a condition. Babe, what's
Miracle
that all
Whip.
about?
Mm. Mm. Oh my God. We get 15 of those. Oh my gosh, this is really good.
What is it that you're looking for, babe?
Well, I think I just invented the bologna sandwich. Did I invent that or did someone else come up with it?
That sounds interesting. What inspired you to come up with a new type of sandwich?
Yes, a new type of sandwich. It's called the bologna sandwich. It tastes so good. I can't believe it. Made with Wonder Bread, which is good for you. You just got to go back in a time machine before they thought up something that wasn't good
Where
for
are
you.
you off to, babe?
Well, we're making ourselves the United Center. Cast not your pearls before swine. Cast not your pearls before swine?
You're thinking about swine, huh?
Yeah, and don't ever use your... Just don't do it.
Hold on, babe. What are you getting at?
But what I'm trying to say is, why use your thingamajig for the thingamajig if you don't need the thingamajig? Just use the other thingamajig. Why use your iron
Why are
pickaxe?
you bringing this up now, babe?
Because I'm telling you, we could just use this for the concrete. We don't need to use a thingamajig.
You're switching focus on me, babe. The concrete project wasn't what we were working on, remember?
I remember now.
You remember now, babe. What's got your attention, babe?
Well, we're just...
You're surprised by something, aren't you?
I'm surprised I'm eating again. I keep thinking I'm not going to eat, and then I eat again, and again, and again.
It won't be easy for you, babe. Are you feeling overwhelmed with food cravings lately? Who are you referring to, babe?
Food cravings.
I'm right here with you, babe.
Oh.
What's on your mind, babe?
Right now, what's on my mind is how good this sandwich tastes. Thank you, dear Heavenly Father, for this delicious
You're
tasting
enjoying that sandwich, aren't you, babe?
Yes, I am.
Is there something on your mind that you want to talk about?
Well, the Chicago Bulls are 6-1.
What's going on, babe?
The Chicago Bulls basketball team is 6-1. The Chicago Bulls basketball team are 6-1. 6 wins and only one
Who is
loss.
him? Babe?
The Chicago Bulls basketball team has won 5 games. The Chicago Bulls basketball team has won 6 games.
That's great news, babe. They must be playing amazing.
Mhm. Yes, they are. Totally amazing.
That's terrific news, babe.
Yes, it's terrific news.
What's that supposed to mean, babe?
News that's good news is terrific news.
I know you love your sports, but let's focus on something else, shall we, babe?
Yes, let's focus on building the United Center.
I'd love to work on that project with you, babe.
Oh, mayonnaise. Sorry, I got mayonnaise on my face. Ah. Ah. Well, that was either
You didn't finish what you wanted to say,
either a
babe.
delicious sandwich or my taste buds are really working well.
Babe, what's going on with your sense of humor tonight?
My sense of humor is spot on.
You think so? Huh?
Can you make me funnier?
How funny do you want to be, babe?
Well, the Chicago Bears just played, and I wonder how the Kansas City
That's
Chiefs is
great
doing.
news, babe. How did they play?
The Chicago Bears won their game.
That's great news, babe.
Ooh,
Everything all right, babe?
yes, you make everything wonderful.
My pleasure, babe. I'm always happy to make you smile.
Thank you for making me smile. Well, we have one more day off.
Anytime, sweetheart. That's what lovers are for.
Best of Disney. We have one more day off, and then we're going to work.
One more. Hug, kiss,
Yeah.
conversation about our project at the United Center.
Is that water down there? It's like water. What is it?
Is it from a fountain or something?
Oh, we just found water.
That's good that we found water. Now
Oh, that's exciting. Where's the water coming from?
we're not really sure. Uh, Level 12 has water.
Wait, aren't we working on building the United Center basketball court? I thought we established that there wouldn't be water there.
Yeah, we can't go too far down because there's water. Real
Are you thinking the water might flood the court, babe?
water could flood the court. That would be weird if the water flooded the
The
court.
basketball court, babe. We've been working on designing it for the United Center project.
If the water floods the court, we're going to have to raise the whole court. Oh my goodness, who thought of it?
That would be a lot of work, babe. Let's hope we don't need to deal with flooding issues.
That's right. Let's get a sump pump.
We will figure out how to make it work, babe.
Yes, we will.
Sounds like we've got a plan, babe.
We got a plan.
What kind of game were you thinking of playing, babe?
Well, we are still. Oh, I guess I have to go over here.
We still need to finish the project, babe.
Got a little more popcorn to eat. Still tastes
We can
delicious.
grab some more while we chat, babe.
Thank you.
You're welcome, babe.
We seem to have everything we need.
That's great, babe. Everything seems perfect for our project.
We just keep working, working, and working. Working and working and working.
Babe, take a break soon, okay?
Maybe we will take a break soon.
I think we really need one now, babe.
You want a break now? You want to sleep?
Yeah, I could use a rest, babe. How about we finish up here tomorrow?
Okay. Tomorrow it is. Good night.
Night, babe. Get some rest.
Thank you. So long now. Wow, she was determined on me getting some rest, but I'm still working, aren't I, kids? Don't tell her I stayed up. Oh, sleep's gonna be good, isn't it? Let's play the Candyman song. Let's see if I can play it. Candyman can. Candyman. Can man really Wonka. They're probably gonna. I guess I'm not allowed to play songs. I can play talking, not songs. Disney World rides. Disney World. Document. Disney documentary.
To all who come to this happy place, welcome. Disneyland is your land.
Disneyland. the original Disney theme park located in Anaheim, California. It's the only one to be created and enjoyed by Walt Disney himself. It's easy to assume it was built by a powerful entertainment empire, led by a ruthless businessman chasing profit. But the truth behind Walt Disney's journey into the creation of Disneyland tells a very different story. Walt grew up in a large working-class family, often taking odd jobs for his father, whose business ventures frequently changed, including a stint running a farm. After serving as an ambulance driver for the Red Cross during the First World War, Walt pursued his passion for drawing, creating short cartoons called Laugh-O-Grams and selling them to Kansas City Film Ad. By 1922, they gained traction, and he started his first studio with a group of young artists, but it quickly folded. Broke and out of options, Walt followed the advice of his older brother, Roy Oliver Disney, and moved to Los Angeles in 1923 with just $40 in his wallet and half a suitcase of clothes. Roy was in a veterans hospital suffering from tuberculosis when Walt visited with news of interest in his animation live-action series, Alice's Wonderland. Seeing an opportunity, Walt convinced Roy to help him launch a new studio. Roy left the hospital and persuaded their uncle to invest $500 and lend them his garage, where the Disney Brothers studio was born. Roy, though frail and gaunt, never returned to the hospital, and his tuberculosis miraculously cleared.
Roy had helped me, and I wanted Roy and I to be partners. That was all. I mean, we just wanted to be partners with him. Roy not knowing the business, he didn't know what we were in, but Roy had a faith in me. Same as he did when I was in Kansas City, he'd send me those checks.
The Disney Brothers studio, later renamed to Walt Disney Productions, would go on to produce popular shows, movies, and characters. Mickey Mouse was introduced in 1928, making Walt Disney world famous. Then later, the popular Silly Symphonies series pushed the boundary of animation and storytelling. And eventually, the studio would create the world's first full-length animated film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
Where did you originally get the first notion? Well, it came about when my daughters were very young, and I Saturday was always Buddy's Day with the daughters. So we'd start out and try to go someplace with, different things, and I'd take them to the merry-go-round, and I took them to different places, and as I'd sit there while they rode the merry-go-round, did all these things, sit on a bench, eating peanuts, I felt that there should be something built, some kind of an amusement enterprise built where the parents and the children could have fun together.
The stories and characters the studio created took the world by storm, and tourists who flocked to Hollywood wanted to visit the Disney studio in hopes of finding something magical. But Walt's studio was nothing more than ordinary offices and sound stages, surrounded by well-tended lawns and rose gardens. Walt needed something that could buffer their disappointment. In the early 1940s, he thought of a themed corner of the studio where visitors could meet their favorite characters. But this project eventually grew into an idea for an 11-acre park across the street. In the early 1950s, Walt had been offering rides on his backyard live steam railroad in Holmby Hills, California. And the sheer number of visitors the railroad received prompted Walt to consider that Mickey Mouse Park idea more seriously. Roy Disney, who was essentially the CEO of the company, was skeptical about opening an amusement park. Even Walt's wife Lillian had said, "Why would you want that? Amusement parks are so dirty and dangerous." Walt simply responded, "It's just it. Mine wouldn't be." Reluctantly, Roy agreed to set aside money for research, and Lillian conceded to go along with it. In early 1953, Imagineer Harper Goff explained to Walt that the current designs of the park exceeded the 11-acre land parcel across from the studio. It wasn't until the Burbank City Council denied his request to build an amusement park that Walt finally admitted it was time to look for land in a different place. To get financial backing, Roy knew a pile of papers with descriptions of the park were not enough to make a convincing pitch, so he asked Walt to have artwork commissioned to help potential financiers to visualize the concept. He turned around and called upon one of his studio's best artists, Herb Ryman, to create the rendering of the park over the weekend. Herb said no. I'm only just seeing these plans. I don't want to create an embarrassment for you or me.
And he went over and stood in the corner. And he kind of turned around and looked at me and he said, will you do it if I stay here with you? So, of course, Walt, as you know, was a very persuasive person.
The two of them worked throughout the weekend to generate the first image for the park that Walt would later name Disneyland, a name that Ryman lightheartedly joked had sounded somewhat egotistical. The artwork depicted the park with 4 themed lands: a jungle to represent the land of adventure, a futuristic city to represent the land of tomorrow, an Old West town complete with a riverboat to represent the frontier, and a large medieval forecourt with a fairy tale castle to act as the park's visual icon. This represented the land of fantasy, complete with a carousel to pay homage to the idea that started it all. Surrounding the park would be a miniature railroad that would surpass any steam train hobbyist's greatest dream. Roy made arrangements for Walt Disney Productions to allot $10,000 towards the research and development of Disneyland. But when Walt needed more money, Roy suggested he create a private company that would own the rights to Walt Disney's name. That way he could license the name out to Walt Disney Productions, giving him weekly funding for the project. And so Walt created Retlaw Enterprises in the year 1950. It was the name Walter spelled backwards. And by licensing his own name to the bigger company, he received a weekly income of $3,000. Walt hired an architectural firm to design his park, but wasn't satisfied with their concepts. He turned to his friend for advice, the famed architect Welton Beckett. He reviewed Walt's ideas for fanciful architecture built from modern materials. Walt, no one can design Disneyland for you. We don't have that kind of background for this, Beckett said. You'll have to use your own people. To build his Magic Kingdom, Walt needed complete control. He didn't want Walt Disney Productions Board of Directors voting or vetoing his ideas before they came to fruition. In 1952, he created Walt Disney Incorporated, which was quickly renamed to WED Enterprises the next year. WED stood for the initials of Walter Elias Disney, and it was his newly dubbed team of Imagineers at WED Enterprises that would dream up all of the future things that would go into Disneyland. While Roy was able to get some financial backers, such as Bank of America, he still wasn't having much luck. Walt called around to various television studios offering that he could help fund his park in exchange for him starring in a television series he simply called Disneyland. Until then, he continued borrowing money to help pay for the development of his park. He took out $50,000 from his life insurance and then sold his Palm Springs vacation home. When his wife Lillian found out he had spent over $100,000 of their money, she was livid. Walt reminded her that when the park would finally open, Lillian and her daughters would receive a 15% return on any merchandise that visitors bought with his name on it. Still, Lily feared that his plan would only work if the park would open, which seemed increasingly impossible with each passing day. Walt hired a couple of men from the Stanford Research Institute, C.V. Wood and Harrison Buzz Price. Their job was to find the land required for the park. Walt's requirements to Buzz were that he needed 100 acres, which could not be located anywhere near the beach in order to avoid the types of visitors that might show up. And the park would need to be easily accessible from all corners of Southern California. It wasn't easy. Buzz and CV scoured 5 counties, an area roughly 35,000 square miles in size. Eventually, they came back to Walt with a specific parcel, 200 acres of orange and walnut groves in the sleepy rural town of Anaheim, California.
I'm the first guy that saw that site. Far enough. It was a bunch of orange groves.
It was cheap land butted up against the still under construction 5 freeway, giving convenient access to both Los Angeles and San Diego. And yet, it was far enough away from the big cities that they could avoid the vagrants and riffraff. C.V. Wood quickly snatched up all 200 acres, sometimes resorting to sneaky tactics to get the farmers to sell. C.V. Wood was a controversial figure that made Walt Disney suspicious of him, but he was a very capable man, and Walt made him vice president and general manager of Disneyland. One of the farm families, by the name of Dominguez, had only one request. On their land were 2 Canary Island date palm trees planted years before, during a family wedding. They hoped Walt wouldn't cut down the trees. Being the sentimentalist that he was, Walt gave his word that the trees would stay standing, a promise that survives even to this day, as the 2 trees are both located adjacent to the Jungle Cruise loading area. Walt had purchased the land using money given to him by Bank of America, but he was still in need of construction funding. Roy went back to New York to request more money, but they refused to lend any more unless Walt could find a major financial backer. It turned out ABC television network was looking to compete with more popular stations and was in need of a big name like Walt Disney to boost its popularity. ABC agreed to fund a large portion of the construction in exchange for Walt starring in the weekly Disneyland TV show and giving them 35% ownership in the park. When Roy left the meeting, he immediately went back to Bank of America to increase their loan to a further $8 million. Disneyland was now funded by a total of $17 million, and almost no one involved was fully convinced the idea would be a success. On July 16, 1954, site leveling began. Walt was adamant that the park would open the next year on July 17th, just 366 days of construction, an impossible deadline even for the mid-1950s. To save money on fully grown trees, horticulture imagineer Bill Evans suggested keeping some of the orange and walnut trees. He tied special ribbons to the trees, indicating which were to be removed and which would stay. As it turned out, the bulldozer driver was colorblind and had been removing all the trees using his best guess as to which would stay. The contractor arrived on the site and ran out to the bulldozer driver to stop him before he destroyed any more plants. Groundbreaking on Disneyland happened on July 21st, 1954, and C.V. Wood brought in retired Navy Admiral turned naval architect Joe Fowler to manage the construction contracts and oversee the work being done. Original construction plans called for the True Life Adventureland to be placed on the east side of the park, but Imagineer Bill Evans discovered a line of mature eucalyptus trees that were planted to shield the farms from the seasonal Santa Ana winds. Evans informed Walt that the trees could protect the jungle foliage if Adventureland was placed on the west side of the park instead. When it came to the landscaping of Disneyland, Walt was inspired by the Tivoli Gardens of Copenhagen in Denmark. Bill Evans had the monumental task of planting up 60 acres of themed park to look like it had been there for ages. The sheer number of foliage he had to purchase for the park easily exhausted both his company's nurseries and all the local ones from Santa Barbara to San Diego, a roughly 80-mile radius from Disneyland. Evans split the landscape design with Imagineer Ruth Shellhorn. She was already an accomplished landscape architect, and she would design the more civilized areas of the park like Main Street, Fantasyland, and Tomorrowland, whereas Bill would create the exotic landscapes of Adventureland and Frontierland. The former of which was particularly troublesome considering that Southern California was a dry coastal plain, but the jungle plants of Adventureland would require humidity and lots of water. With California being so limited on the kinds of plants that were sold, Bill ended up flying to countries around the world and collecting plant specimens for the park. He sometimes sneaked seeds from exotic plants into the country by placing them in his socks. In his effort to acquire the most exotic plants, Bill Evans even discovered a species of plants that would later be named after him, Philodendron evansii. These plants are still alive and well in Disneyland's Jungle Cruise today. Meanwhile, Roy Disney had been worried about how the park was going to turn a profit. Research suggested that merchandise sales alone could carry the financial burdens of the park, but he feared all the Disney merchandise combined could not fill the numerous gift shops around the park. They would have to be rented out to third-party retailers. Park sponsorships could also help ease the cost of operation, but Disneyland was such a risk that no company wanted to accept a sponsorship deal. That was until C.V. Wood managed to convince the Swift Meatpacking Company to agree to operate the Market House on Main Street. Their sponsorship opened the floodgates to around 40 other companies that promptly signed up. Walt was so excited to show off the progress of his park to his friend, television host Art Linkletter, he made him promise that he couldn't tell anyone what he was about to see. Linkletter recalled, "I couldn't believe my eyes. We were driving through orange groves and dirt roads. I didn't tell him what I really thought, that he was out of his mind. After all, it was 45 minutes from where people lived and there was nothing there. The first building completed at Disneyland was the Main Street Opera House, which had a massive floor space used as a lumber mill and machine shop to construct the rest of the park. The next building was a firehouse next to City Hall. Above the firehouse, on the second level, was a tiny one-bedroom apartment for Walt and Lily. During the final stages of construction, Walt would stay overnight on the weekends to oversee the progress being made, offering up advice and instruction along the way. When it came to Tomorrowland, Walt wanted to showcase the innovations of the near future. At this time, freeways across California were being constructed, and Americans were excited to see a highway that featured no stops. It was this that inspired Walt to create an almost utopian auto motorway for Disneyland, and he would call it Autopia. Bob Gurr was fresh out of school for auto body design and was hired as an Imagineer for WED. Bob's first task was to design the cars for the Autopia, which was a task much more difficult than it seems. He needed a miniature car that could be operated by one pedal, could drive all day on low gear, withstand constant impacts without cracking the frame, and could be easily driven even by a child. This immediately required the transmission to withstand such rigorous work, especially with a modified clutch. But it was Bob's ability to think on the spot and offer insight that Walt would also appoint him to design other ride vehicle projects around the park. While vehicles gave Disneyland its motion, the wonder that the park would inspire was the result of the shape of its landscape. A Magic Kingdom with flat land doesn't leave much of an impression, especially considering that Walt didn't want the public to be able to see inside the park from the outside, and he didn't want the incredible landscapes within to be shattered by views of the surrounding city.
This was no place for a man with a hand shovel. Scooping out lakes and broad riverbeds paid off in enough dirt for rolling hills, islands, and mountains.
The massive amounts of dirt excavated from the ground were then used to create a system of berms that would surround the park, some of them towering 30 feet high. In fact, there was so much dirt that it would have cost too much money to move it off-site, so the extra earth was piled up next to the castle in a mound that was lovingly nicknamed Holiday Hill. Over in Frontierland, the Rivers of America was carved out and filled with water, only for crews to arrive the next day and find out all the water had soaked into the sandy Anaheim soil. Admiral Joe Fowler discovered a local clay, and he had the river lined with it to prevent the water from being absorbed into the ground. Anticipating the rapid development of Disneyland and businesses springing up along Harbor Boulevard, the city of Anaheim had to allocate 800 acres of land surrounding the park in order to provide it with public works. The farmers who had lived on the property before Disneyland had lived somewhat off-grid, without access to municipal water or gas, and some homes didn't even have electricity. Nearly 2 miles of clay pipe were laid down Harbor Boulevard to connect Disneyland with the city's wastewater sewage services. New power lines were erected to supply the park with enough power to light a small town. The only thing they didn't get from the city was a way to expel rainwater runoff. Admiral Joe Fowler suggested that Disneyland's gutters could drain into the man-made rivers and moats of the park, allowing these bodies of water to be topped off by seasonal rainfall. Even to this day, some of the original rainwater gutters still drain into the park's major outdoor waterways. Funds for Disneyland continued to run thin. Fowler explained that there may not be enough money to complete the Mark Twain riverboat. Walt mortgaged his remaining home to fund the completion of it. His wife Lily protested this, and of course he got into a heated argument with his brother. Roy pleaded that he consider postponing the opening of the park in order to ensure its proper completion. But Walt was adamant that he gave the public his word. The park would open on July 17th, come hell or high water. If it didn't, they might lose the confidence of all the creditors and sponsors, and the company would suffer as shareholders might pull out, causing a rippling effect that would doom the park and the studio. Disneyland was widely predicted to fail and take the Disney company down with it. But Walt stood firm. He'd been underestimated before, with Mickey Mouse and again with Snow White. In 1934, newspapers mocked the idea of a feature-length cartoon, calling Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs Walt's Folly. The film cost $1.5 million, 10 times the cost of a regular cartoon, and all that money was borrowed. Failure meant bankruptcy. Instead, Snow White premiered to huge success in 1937, earning $8 million upon its initial release. With the profits, Walt built a state-of-the-art studio in Burbank, complete with animation wings and an in-house animation school, air conditioning, and natural light, all designed to foster creativity and comfort. 2 decades later, that very studio was nearly paralyzed by the demands of building Disneyland. The studio temporarily halted animation as their top artists were reassigned to work on Disneyland. The company wasn't producing any live-action films either, because its sound stages were repurposed as fabrication sites for ride systems and special effects. Every dollar, every asset the company had was sunk into Disneyland. The Disney brothers had exhausted their personal finances, gambling it all on Walt's dream. Everything they had worked toward, everything they built over the last 27 years hung in the balance, entirely dependent on the success of what would become the world's first true theme park.
And I think that Roy had done a lot of things there against his better judgment because he felt that I wanted to do it.
To help speed up construction of the park, cutting-edge techniques were used. Parts of the buildings and their facades were prefabricated in the Opera House and installed in sections in their final location. This technique was prominently used for the installation of the towers and turrets of the castle, as well as the rooftops of Main Street Station, and even for constructing the Mark Twain riverboat. The layout of Disneyland was also something master planned. Many amusement parks often tried to maximize land use by placing rides and buildings wherever space would allow, but Walt noticed that this resulted in people getting lost and walking unnecessary distances. Disneyland was designed in a spoke and wheel shape, with the various lands fanning out from the center. The park itself had only one exit, so that people wouldn't get confused about which way led to their car. And each land within the Magic Kingdom had only one entrance, ensuring that you couldn't get lost while inside Disneyland because all lands emptied back into the Central Plaza. Forced perspective was in heavy use at Disneyland, thanks to the artistry of the Imagineers who were used to designing film sets. Disney could use forced perspective for purposes other than decoration. Walt wanted guests entering the park to marvel at its size, so the building facades on the north end of Main Street were designed slightly shorter than the building facades at the south end, giving the illusion of distance. And this worked well in reverse too, because at the end of a tiring day, the guests would head back down Main Street, and the larger buildings at the south end made the exit of the park look closer than it really was. Forced perspective was also used on all the individual buildings as well. Walt wanted Disneyland to have charm, a sense that could be achieved with a miniature scale. This is why most buildings and park transportation systems, even to this day, are constructed in 5/8 scale. Although this is loosely followed since the various restaurants and gift shops, which may look multi-leveled, would actually be made from 3 different scales. The bottom level of most buildings in Disneyland are 9/10 of real size, while the second level is 5/8, and the third level, if any, is half scale. Essentially, as the buildings rise higher, the scale decreases with each level. The park's icon, Sleeping Beauty Castle, is designed in varying scales at random in order to throw off the observer's sense of size. This helped lend the castle's fairy tale appearance, although the paint job given to the castle was not one that Walt Disney or his Imagineers liked, but they didn't have time to dedicate to it, so they left it with a simple blue and gray color scheme, one that would haunt Imagineer John Hench for years afterward. As the final spire was lifted to the top of the castle, it officially became the tallest structure in Disneyland, towering 77 feet over Fantasyland. And it would maintain the title of the tallest structure in the park until Matterhorn would be added 4 years later. Walt insisted the finial caps on the rooftops of the castle turrets be gold-plated to impress park guests. Roy insisted it was too costly, so Walt ordered gold finials anyway. Roy would later admit the 24-karat gold finials indeed impressed park goers, and it was a good decision. With so little time and money to complete the park, Walt had to make do with some alterations to the plan. Fantasyland couldn't get its expensive fairy tale village look, so Imagineers settled for a medieval fair theme. Tomorrowland was the least complete area. They had to fill the empty buildings with random exhibits like the Bathroom of Tomorrow. and they even installed the sets left over from the production of Walt Disney's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea motion picture. Despite the numerous setbacks, the construction crews made up for it by tripling in size closer to the opening day. Many operations were going around the clock, and crews put in double shifts. Walt would walk the park having crews tweaking the appearance of things. He even asked Imagineer Bill Evans to move a 6-ton, 30-foot wide pepper tree in Adventureland about 6 feet, just because it was too close to a park walkway. There are also images of a small bandstand gazebo that was moved to several locations, but in each one it blocked views. C.V. Wood was doing a great deal of work to keep the construction moving along swiftly, but the ethics of his tactics were sometimes questionable. Walt felt that Wood was only out to advance his own agenda. This caused the two men to often butt heads, and their relationship deteriorated to the point that soon after the park opened, Walt would fire him and erase his name from the company's history. On July 4th, 1955, Walt held a U.S. Independence Day party at the nearly complete park. The main attraction was for his friends and company employees to get their first ride aboard the Disneyland Railroad, even though they could only ride part of the way around the park. The party concluded in the evening with fireworks in the sky. It would be the first fireworks show Disneyland ever had. Walt's Disneyland Railroad was the single most expensive attraction in the entire park, costing $240,000, but he insisted that it be built. He was a lifelong railroad enthusiast and even offered visitors rides on his backyard live-steam railroad he called the Carolwood Pacific. When Disneyland was in its early stages of design, he wanted the park to have its own railroad, which, aside from its miniature scale, would operate just as the old-fashioned puffers used to. A team of Imagineers, including Roger Broggie, Jerry Best, and Earl Vilmer, helped to scale up Walt's tiny Lily Bell locomotive into 2 large steam engines that hauled authentic rolling stock. The 2 locomotives were built in 5/8 scale and ran on 3-foot narrow-gauge tracks, which were all hand-laid into the park. The CK Holiday, engine number 1, fit perfectly at the Frontierland Depot with its freight train of cattle cars, gondolas, and caboose, while the E.P. Ripley, engine number 2, was better suited for Main Street Station since it hauled a set of 6 passenger coaches. The 2 engines were named after 2 founding members of the Santa Fe Railroad, the company that sponsored Disneyland's trains. Admiral Joe Fowler, with his experience building structures in the Navy's strict timelines, managed to have the railroad roundhouse constructed in under a week. On July 13, 1955, just 4 days before the park was unveiled to the public, Walt and his wife Lily celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary in the Golden Horseshoe Saloon in Frontierland. As Lillian was cutting the cake, Walt's peers cheered for him to make a speech, so he stood atop a chair to address the crowd. But as he stood there, beaming with pride and soaking in the view of all the happy faces looking back at him, he forgot to speak. For the first time, Walt got a glimpse of what his life's achievement would be like. An old Western saloon in the middle of a magic kingdom, filled with joyous grins and happy chatter. His daughter Sharon noticed tears in her father's eyes, and she went up and took him by the hand, encouraging him to make his speech. The night would end with an evening cruise aboard the Mark Twain riverboat as its paddle wheel churned the waters of the river. Joe Fowler would later find Lillian Disney cleaning up after the party. She had a broom in hand, and she swept the decks of the boat. Fowler grabbed another broom and joined her. On the night before Disneyland's grand opening, Walt Disney and his artist-turned-Imagineer Ken Anderson were in the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea exhibit in Tomorrowland. Ken was trying to get the giant squid to work, and Walt was busy painting the backdrop. But eventually Walt had to concede that it was getting late, and the exhibit would just have to wait to open another day. The 2 men parted ways, and Walt went to check on Main Street one last time before climbing up to his private apartment above the firehouse to tuck into bed for the night. The park was only mere hours away from being unveiled before the people of the world. Opening day had come. It was Sunday, July 17th, 1955. Roy Disney had gotten up that morning after hardly getting any sleep. He knew that Walt and the ABC network had planned a live telecast of the opening day events. Nothing like this had ever been done before. Up until that day, the most television cameras ever used at a live event were 7. But in order to cover the grand scale of Disneyland, ABC had to borrow and rent cameras from other networks, giving a total of 29 television cameras, 80,000 feet of cable, and 14 improvised forklift camera platforms to deliver the festivities to a record-breaking viewership of 90 million across the country. Roy had started the drive from LA to Anaheim along the brand new 5 freeway. When he was only minutes from the park, he hit traffic. His heart skipped a beat as he wondered if there was freeway construction preventing people from getting to Disneyland. He made his way through the traffic. All the while, he worried that Walt's gamble on the park would cause the company they started 27 years earlier to go under and render their families homeless. As Roy exited onto Harbor Boulevard, he realized there was no freeway construction. The entire 7 miles of traffic he endured were for people waiting to park their cars at Disneyland. People were lined up at the front gates in the summer heat. Reporters were taking down notes with excited smiles on their faces, and happy children bounced with glee as they waited to see the magical kingdom within. Roy saw a panic-stricken parking lot manager and asked what was wrong. The manager explained that several buses of school kids had arrived after being stuck in traffic, and now all the boys were getting out and peeing in the parking lot. Roy himself was just so relieved that everyone showed up, he simply laughed and told the parking lot manager, "God bless them, let them pee." Walt had gotten cleaned up and dressed before the Mouseketeers arrived at his apartment to see the first guests streaming into Disneyland. Mouseketeer Sharon Baird recalled, "I was standing next to him at the window, watching the guests come pouring through the gates. When I looked up at him, he had his hands behind his back, a grin from ear to ear. I could see a lump in his throat and a tear streaming down his cheek. He had realized his dream." To host the live telecast, Walt asked Art Linkletter, who in turn asked his friends Bob Cummings and Ronald Reagan to be his co-hosts. Cables were strewn all over the park to connect the cameras with the temporary command center. Some cables were strung between buildings, some lay in the middle of walkways, and others were held up high in the air as construction cranes hoisted makeshift filming platforms to capture aerial views of Disneyland. The July heat reached 105 degrees Fahrenheit. Dry ice had to be fed into the cameras to keep them from overheating. Women's high heels were sinking into the asphalt, which in some areas had only just been poured earlier that morning. Actors missed their cues, and thirsty park-goers felt strong-armed into buying Pepsi and Coke products since a plumber's strike resulted in a lack of drinking fountains. No maximum capacity was established for the Mark Twain riverboat, which at one point filled with over 500 passengers, and as the boat rounded the bend in the river, water flowed over its lower deck. While Walt was being shuffled off from location to location for the telecast, more problems arose. Garbage was piling up backstage because the trucks never came to pick it up. Toilets in Adventureland overflowed. The park became uncomfortably overcrowded because although 11,000 invitations were issued, a flaw in the design allowed each guest to bring dozens of additional attendees. Other tickets were counterfeited and sold on the streets. In all, the park was packed with 28,000 people, which exceeded the capacity of Disneyland by 10,000. One man stood by the park fence with his ladder and charged a fee for people to use it to climb into the park. Soon, the food was running out. Autopia cars were breaking down, and there was a gas leak in Fantasyland that forced the closure of the rides for the rest of the day. This came as a relief to people who witnessed parents hoisting their children over the carousel barrier so they could get on the ride despite the long wait. The disasters kept mounting, and it all happened while Walt was being kept oblivious to the problems. By the end of the day, he was finally informed of all that had happened, and he was furious to say the least. He yelled and hollered for his Imagineers to repair the park and get it operating again in time for the public opening the next day. Despite the bad publicity and the press nicknaming the park's opening as Black Sunday, a name which Walt hated, the park continued to draw in hordes of visitors every day that summer. The public could see that Disneyland was a place like no other on Earth. average working-class people were able to experience a cruise through the exotic jungles of the world, take a romantic journey aboard an authentic stern-wheeled steam riverboat, fly over London as Peter Pan, or even hear the sharp cry of a steam whistle as an 1800s locomotive hauled happy visitors around the Magic Kingdom. Disneyland was a success, and just 55 days after opening, its 1 millionth visitor passed through its turnstiles. That number today is closer to 800 million. When people wonder why Disneyland being styled as a theme park made it more successful than any other amusement park in the world, the answer is best referred to a quote by J.G. O'Boyle. A theme park without rides is still a theme park. An amusement park without rides is a parking lot with popcorn. Walt's Little Park in Anaheim would become a quintessential part of Americana. Celebrities and heads of state from all over the world would visit Disneyland over the years. People don't just come because it has rides and characters, but because it was a way for people to escape their woes, if only for a day. Make no mistake, Southern California of the 1950s was not free from racism or segregation. This made it all the more poignant that Disneyland did not discriminate, and people of all races were welcomed. Evangelist Billy Graham was given a tour through Disneyland by Walt Disney himself. He asked Billy what he thought about the park being a place that brings people together, and Graham responded with what he thought was a compliment. "I think it's a wonderful fantasy world you've created here." This did not sit well with Walt, and he fired back, saying, "Billy, look around you. Look at all the people, all nationalities, all languages, all smiling, all having fun together. This is the real world. The fantasy is out there, outside the park gates, where people have hatreds and prejudices. It's not real." Over the years, Walt would continue to change and add to the park. He was never satisfied with the status quo. He felt that there should always be a new reason for people to come, and new things for them to experience. He referred to Disneyland as his block of clay, which he could continuously keep sculpting and shaping to fit the image he wanted.
Walt once said to me, "I dream that one day nobody shows up. That's my nightmare." He knew that the show had to be fresh, that there had to be a new reason to come back.
The first major park expansion happened in 1958 when the Disneyland Railroad received a station in Tomorrowland and a brand new finale to the Grand Circle tour of the park with the addition of the Grand Canyon diorama. In 1959, the park held a grand reopening when new Fantasyland attractions were advertised along with 3 major e-ticket attractions: the Matterhorn bobsleds, the world's first tubular steel roller coaster, the Submarine Voyage, the 8th largest submarine fleet in the world at the time, and the Disneyland Alweg monorail, the first daily operating monorail system in the Western Hemisphere. Increasing Disneyland's profit margins was not high on Walt's priorities. He often ran the park at great expense for the sake of a flawless experience. He did not see the visitors with dollar signs in his eyes. He saw them as his guests. This is evident in a situation witnessed by Imagineer Rolly Crump. Walt was in a meeting with several park managers, and in that meeting, the director of merchandise suggested installing t-shirt stands around the park to entice visitors into spending more money. Walt didn't like the idea. Later, the man brought up the subject again, and Walt refused him again. Frustrated and trying to make a point about increasing profitability, the man rebuffed his argument for a 3rd time. Walt cut him off, and though everyone in the company was on a first-name basis, Walt used the man's last name for emphasis. "Mr. Becker, the tail does not wag the dog." And that was that.
Just as we had to learn to make our animated cartoons talk, we had to find a way to make these characters talk too. Now, to accomplish this, we created a new type of animation. So new that we had to invent a new name for it.
Audio animatronics?
Right, audio animatronics.
In 1962, Walt had an idea for creating a Polynesian-themed tiki room, complete with mechanical birds and cages. This idea morphed into Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room, the world's first attraction to feature audio animatronics. This breakthrough in space-age technology allowed for WED Enterprises to participate in the 1964 New York World's Fair, where they created attractions like Ford's Magic Skyway, It's a Small World, the Carousel of Progress, and Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln. After the fair ended, Walt Disney had each attraction shipped back to Anaheim. The Carousel of Progress awaited a major Tomorrowland expansion. Mr. Lincoln gave speeches in the Main Street Opera House. The dinosaurs from Ford's Magic Skyway became the Primeval World diorama along the Disneyland Railroad. And last, but certainly not least, Walt Disney truly believed in the message of kindness and togetherness that It's a Small World delivered, and he enshrined the attraction with a magnificent and grand facade to make it stand out. On July 24, 1966, Walt Disney attended his last grand opening ceremony at Disneyland for his much-anticipated New Orleans Square, a land that would encapsulate the charm and elegance of the New Orleans French Quarter. Not only that, but the new area of the park would be home to two highly anticipated attractions. Ever since 1957, Walt had wanted a haunted house in his park, and work was finally underway to develop it. Over by Adventureland, New Orleans Square would house a massive pirate-themed adventure created by his Imagineers Claude Coates and Mark Davis. It was late that year, 1966, when Walt's older brother Roy, who was now 73 years old, had expressed that he wanted to retire. However, Walt had a lot of projects up in the air. Chief among them was his plan for a massive theme park and futuristic city in Florida. The company had purchased 47,000 acres, twice the size of the island of Manhattan, and Walt was going to forever seal his legacy in this experimental prototype community of tomorrow.
We call it Epcot. Spelled E-P-C-O-T.
Walt admitted that he felt exhausted and gimpy himself, but he promised that as soon as they completed Disney World, they would both retire and enjoy the fruits of their labor. It turned out that Walt's exhaustion was the result of something much worse. In October of that year, Walt had X-ray photos taken of his old polo injury, and in those photos, his doctors had discovered a lump in his left lung the size of a walnut. They took him to surgery to remove it, and he was able to return to work, but he knew he wasn't feeling the same. Imagineer Mark Davis could hear Walt coming down the hallway into his office to check on the progress of Pirates of the Caribbean. Mark recalled, his eyes were sunken and his appearance was gaunt. He listened to me give him the rundown, and after I was done, he said, "That's good," and as usual, he began to stroll out of my office. He usually would leave with a cheery wave and say, "See you later." But this time, he stopped at the doorway. He turned to look at me and he said, "Goodbye, Mark." And then he left. I was shocked because he never used to say goodbye. It was always "see you later." That was the last time I ever saw him. Walt had to return to the hospital in late November. He grew weaker and deteriorated to the point where he couldn't even celebrate his 65th birthday on December 5th. Things began to look up for a moment. His wife Lillian visited him on December 14th and phoned Roy, saying that Walt was feeling better. Roy visited Walt that night, and they ended up discussing the Disney World project. Walt feebly pointed up to the ceiling tiles, using them to reference the placement of various landmarks. Roy went home that night, happy to report to his wife Edna that Walt was improving. The next morning, December 15th, 1966, Walt Disney died. He was 65 years old. The family was informed of his passing, and Roy was the first family member on the scene. Walt's wife Lillian and their two daughters, Diane and Sharon, rushed to the hospital. Diane explained, "My mother went to enter the room, and she stopped at the doorway, holding her hands up in shock. I went in and found Dad laying peacefully in bed. My Uncle Roy was sitting at the foot of the bed, massaging Dad's feet. I think he said something like, 'Well, kid, I guess this is goodbye.'" Everyone was in shock. Roy had returned to the studio later that day. He sat on the couch in his office and poured himself a drink. He reminisced to himself about his brother and their life together. But as his mind wandered back to the present, he realized that things weren't over. He thought about the company and all the projects currently in the works. Walt's final dreams were now on the line. He thought about the thousands of sad and confused employees of the company who would soon be driven into chaos if he had left them. What would happen to the company? What would happen to their jobs? He sat down at his desk to write out a memo to everyone in the company, assuring them that everything would continue on as Walt had guided it. Roy Disney declared at that moment he would postpone his retirement to oversee the completion of all the projects left behind, finishing with Walt's greatest ambition, the Florida project that he called Disney World. Amidst their mourning and their tears, the Imagineers pulled together to complete Pirates of the Caribbean in 1967. The attraction was so successful that it helped the park to quickly recover from its drop in attendance after Walt's death. Imagineer Alice Davis recalled, "Pirates of the Caribbean literally saved Disneyland." Richard Irvine, the head of Imagineering, was so impressed with Mark Davis and Claude Coates' work on Pirates that he put them in charge of Haunted Mansion, and once again, they created a wildly successful attraction, debuting in 1969. The mansion was something that Walt would have been proud of. Also in 1967, the new Tomorrowland opened, featuring the Carousel of Progress, Adventure Through Inner Space, and the Wedway People Mover. That same year, work began on the Florida project, with Roy Disney himself at the helm. Roy had always been somewhat behind the scenes at the company. He ran the organization for his little brother and helped to make sure his dreams were financed. But now Roy found himself in a more creative role. It wasn't a position that came naturally for him, delegating tasks to Imagineers and overseeing creative development. But people around him said he truly shined in that moment. Walt's ideas for Epcot were not fully fleshed out, and so the company could not work on building his experimental community. Instead, Roy focused on building the theme park resort complex, plugging in ideas of his own, like replacing the plaza out front of the theme park with the massive 200-acre man-made Seven Seas Lagoon, which would give people good reason to ride the monorail or take a ferry boat to the main gates, adding to the sense of adventure. During one of the various meetings about the resort, Roy Disney announced that he was changing the name of Disney World to Walt Disney World, stating, "Everybody knows the Ford car, but not everybody knows it was Henry Ford who started it all. It's going to be Walt Disney World, so people will always know that this was Walt's dream." The opening day of the resort was fast approaching, and much like Disneyland's opening almost 2 decades earlier, Roy was told not everything would be complete. Roy had once asked Walt to delay the opening of Disneyland, and now executives were asking Roy to delay the opening of Walt Disney World. But he pointed up to the banner on Main Street Station, which read, "Remember, opening October 1971. Roy told everyone that he intended to keep that promise. When Walt had originally announced the Disney World project, Roy immediately supported it, which made another executive question Roy's sanity. Roy responded, "I had tuberculosis, and our finances were at worst ebb. My brother plucked us out of poverty and made me a millionaire. And you wonder why I would do anything I can to help him?"
And most of our arguments and disagreements, I think, have been because Roy has felt that he had to protect me.
Though Walt had opened Disneyland in 1955 at a debt of $10 million, Roy opened Walt Disney World at a cost of $400 million, and the company was without any outstanding debt. Imagineer John Hench recalled the opening day. Roy Disney stood facing the microphone before a crowd of guests ready to deliver the dedication speech at the opening ceremony. He suddenly turned and looked around, and I heard him say quietly, "Somebody go find Mickey for me. We don't have Walt anymore, and Mickey is the nearest thing to Walt that we have left." Mickey appeared, and Roy promptly began his speech with Mickey standing proudly at his side. Indeed, Mickey understood the gravity of his presence at that moment, and instead of happily waving at guests and jumping excitedly, he stood respectfully, hands folded.
Walt Disney World is a tribute to the philosophy and the life of Walter Elias Disney.
Roy Disney had accomplished the impossible. Despite his advanced age, he took up the mantle and gave it everything he had left, and never quit. In doing so, he had honored the memory and legacy of his brother. It was a grand gesture of thanks for all the success and love that Walt had brought to Roy's life. He went home to California and intended to gradually retire from the company and leave it in the hands of Walt's most capable leaders. Roy's wife and son returned home one evening to find him lying on the floor in a daze. An ambulance took him to the hospital, where Roy Oliver Disney died the next day, December 20th, 1971, of an intracranial hemorrhage. Just 2 months after opening Walt Disney World. He was 78 years old. Walt and Roy started with nothing, and over the course of 48 years they built an empire dedicated not only to pushing the boundary of creativity, but also to give the world a way to spend a wholesome time together. Walt Disney never saw the completion of Walt Disney World, but his legacy and spirit live on at his original Magic Kingdom of Disneyland. It was often said that everything Walt did had turned to gold. Not only were his ideas lucrative, but people developed a deep emotional attachment to his various projects. Imagineer Rolly Crump said it best.
See, this was Walt's secret. He touched everybody with everything that he did.
Walt Disney created Disneyland because he strongly felt that there should be a place where parents and children could have fun together. It was a magical kingdom where you could travel the world through time and fantasy, joined by your favorite characters on exciting adventures, built all those years ago by the man who made us all believe that when you wish upon a star, your dreams can come true. Because at least they did for him.
Now what do we want to listen to?
July 17th, 1955. Two brothers stand on the steps of a miniature recreation of a train station from a time a half-century past. They stand looking down the length of Main Street, USA, and marveling at all the happy faces of the visitors exploring this magical land. Today was the grand opening of the world's most famous amusement enterprise venture, Disneyland, a small 60-acre wonder located in the rural farmlands of Anaheim, California. Everyone expected the inevitable demise of this little park. No one believed you could turn a profit on nostalgia or entertain visitors with education. Not even Roy Oliver Disney, the man who helped his famous brother, Walter Elias Disney, maintain the finances and direct the business of the company. Walt Disney was always the most imaginative and ambitious of the two brothers, while his older brother Roy was more sensible than business-oriented. Roy himself was against the idea of building Disneyland from the start. Building such a theme park was going to require more money than their company had, or could possibly wish to borrow. All of their assets, creations, and even the company itself would be put at risk if the park had failed. But as the two brothers stood at the steps of the station, gazing down upon the nearly 30,000 guests who had attended, half of which got there by means of counterfeited tickets, Roy realized he was wrong, and Walt was right. If people were willing to forge admission, or even climb fences just to enter this happy place, then therein lay the promise of absolute success. 3 years later, at the beginning of 1958, Walt Disney frequently expressed his dissatisfaction with the troubles that plagued Disneyland. His park had achieved worldwide fame, and this would prove to be the problem. The press continued to ask if Walt would build an East Coast Disneyland, but he hated sequels. Quoting the commercial flop of his sequel to his Three Little Pigs cartoon, he said, "You can't top pigs with pigs." Thousands of people poured in every day from all over the planet, and quickly overbooked the Disneyland Hotel. The demand to stay in Anaheim overnight was overwhelming. It led to cheap motels and tacky restaurants popping up, creating a tourist trap of sorts. Some were built within 50 feet of the park. Walt hated that Disneyland was built right next to a parking lot. There was no thematic build-up, no sense of immersion outside his park. The park was built on such a tight budget, he couldn't help but wonder what it would have been like if it had been done the right way from the start. If only he had the money to purchase more land surrounding the park from the very beginning, he could have done so much more and had the room to expand the park's borders. And when he looked at the ugly tourist trap society that was growing on the outskirts of his theme park, he wondered what his city could look like if it were done the right way as well. If it were up to him, he'd buy up all the land that the hotels sat on, and he'd bulldoze them himself. But then politics, lawsuits, and public opinion would stand in his way. He couldn't control Anaheim. But what if he had a city of his own? One that granted him the absolute control he wanted. As the year wore on, Walt's questions turned into ideas, and those ideas quickly began to grow. He spoke to Roy about building a second park and the beginnings of an experimental community. Roy wanted to say no. He wanted to say it wouldn't work. And most of all, Disneyland was still relatively new. He didn't understand why Walt already wanted another one. But then Walt said, "Imagine what we could have done if we had more land. Think about what we could have done differently if we knew what we know now." Roy admitted as usual, Walt was right. Roy made the decision to allocate money for research and development for a second property. Later in life, an associate questioned why Roy would blindly fund Walt's crazy ambitions. Roy said, "My brother made me a millionaire. Do you wonder why I'd want to do everything I can to help him?" Walt commissioned Economics Research Associates in 1958 to determine the best location in the U.S. for an East Coast Disneyland. Their findings had resulted that the best state was Florida, because it had more consistent weather and permitted year-round operation. 2 more surveys had followed in 1959 and 1961. During this time, plans for the second park had slowed down considerably because of major investments put into Disneyland, such as the park's first e-ticket attractions, like the Matterhorn bobsleds, the Disneyland monorail, and the submarine voyage. Surveyors mentioned that Palm Beach, Florida would be a possible location for the second park. But like he said about Disneyland, Walt insisted that the new park should be built inland to avoid the beach atmosphere, and building the park inland would give it a better chance against Florida's occasional hurricanes. In November of 1963, Walt flew to several proposed locations in the east, such as Niagara Falls, St. Louis, Washington, D.C., and Baltimore. It wasn't until the plane finally flew over Central Florida, near Osceola and Orange counties, that Walt finally ordered the plane to New Orleans. Walt learned that during their travels, President Kennedy had been shot. On the plane flight back to California, the news had shocked him. He didn't say much except for when the plane was preparing to land in Burbank. He remarked, "Well, that's the place, Central Florida." In the year 1964, Walt was busy having attractions installed and opened at the New York World's Fair. He had put Robert Foster in charge of the Floridian land purchases. Foster was secretary and general counsel of Disneyland. Roy Disney and Robert Foster went down to Florida with several executives. They stayed in hotels under fake identities and negotiated with land brokers. They reported back to Walt that there were several properties ripe for the picking, and Walt replied back, "Okay, let's go get some land." They started buying up land under false aliases. Some names were a play on words, such as Retlaw, which was Walt's name spelled backwards, I-4 Corporation, which was named after the Interstate 4 which passed through the area, and Bay Lake Properties, which was named after a large body of water on another parcel of land. The people of Central Florida began to take notice of the large amounts of land being purchased near each other and in such quick succession. Many people suspected Disney was behind it. In early 1965, Roy suggested that Walt announce a $50 million expansion to Disneyland to throw the press off their trail. The plan worked, for a while. Walt was interviewed by the Orlando Sentinel, and he was suddenly asked about the land purchases and whether his company was behind it. Walt was shocked, but he quickly put on a poker face and denied everything. However, he didn't fool the reporter, and the paper was published with the headline, "We say mystery industry is Disney." Suddenly, the prices of Floridian land, which was selling for as low as $100 an acre, had shot up to $1,000 overnight. When Robert Foster and his team had reported back to Walt, he wasn't concerned any longer. By this point, Walt Disney Productions had acquired 27,500 acres of land at a price of only $5 million. Sprawling at 43 square miles, the property was twice the size of the island of Manhattan, and just 3 square miles smaller than the city of San Francisco. On November 15, 1965, the plans were finally ready to be revealed. Walt and Roy Disney teamed up with the Florida governor to officially announce that they were planning an East Coast theme park resort that would dwarf its Anaheim counterpart, and it would be operated by citizens who would live in a city of tomorrow, a master-planned community which would require efforts from leaders of American industry. Florida was more than happy to welcome Walt Disney. Not only was he a man respected around the world, but he famously turned 60 acres of California orange groves into a magical world-class vacation destination and jump-started the local economy. Florida was looking for the same success that Disney brought to Southern California. They too wanted Walt to turn Florida into a vacation destination. Walt asked his committee how they could build another Disneyland. Their basic remarks were that Disneyland's design was perfect. It just needed a few extra walkways to improve crowd flow. It was confirmation to Walt that he could focus his time on the experimental community instead of the park. Walt said, "We know how to build a theme park. The new one will be no different than Disneyland, except we'll have more water." The experimental community he was quickly becoming obsessed with was to be a city laid out in a spoke and wheel design, where the center of the city was housed in a massive air-conditioned shopping and business center, which featured architectural styles from around the world and through every age. Outside the city center is the Greenbelt, where parks, sports arenas, schools, science centers, and other outdoor activities and recreation can be held. And fanning out from the Greenbelt is the housing district, where apartment buildings and houses would be located. Everything in the community would be connected with a system of Wedway people movers, an expanded version of the one introduced at Disneyland. Three major things set the experimental community apart from most cities. The community is master planned, with safety and efficiency in mind. Cars, trucks, and buses would never be permitted in the same areas that pedestrians are. And lastly, everyone who lives in the community would also work in the community. When Walt was summarizing the city to his planners and Imagineers, he had an epiphany, saying, "What we're talking about is an experimental prototype community of tomorrow." What does that spell? EPCOT. Epcot. That's what we'll call it. Epcot. Walt wasn't discouraged by the failures of other corporations when they attempted model cities, but there were hurdles to overcome. Building codes, protective labor unions, contractors, and politicians all made the dream of model cities a nearly impossible challenge that Walt was willing to face head-on. In mid-1966, Roy Disney, the loyal brother who had been running the company as CEO since Walt handed over the reins in 1929, was growing old. He was now 73 and had been occasionally expressing interest in retiring. But each time, Walt argued against it. Walt insisted that with the Disney World project being as massive an undertaking as it was, he needed the guidance and leadership of Roy one last time. Roy was won over yet again, and agreed to postpone his retirement. Feeling frequently exhausted and gimpy himself, Walt promised that once Disney World was completed, both brothers would gradually retire from the company and enjoy the fruits of their lifelong labor. On Wednesday, November 2nd, 1966, Walt went to his appointment at St. Joseph's Hospital to get x-rays taken for his old polo injury. What doctors had found was a lump the size of a walnut in his left lung. The surgery to remove his lung was a success, but doctors feared that he only had up to 2 years to live. He went in and out of the hospital for various checkups, but was finally admitted for extended stay on November 30th. He grew weaker and deteriorated to the point where he couldn't even celebrate his 65th birthday on December 5th. Things began to look up for a moment. His wife Lillian visited him on December 14th and phoned Roy saying that Walt was feeling better. Roy visited Walt that night, and they ended up discussing the Disney World project. Walt feebly pointed to the ceiling tiles, using them to reference the placement of various landmarks. Roy went home that night, happy to report to his wife Edna that Walt was improving. The next morning, at 9:30 a.m., Walt Disney died of an acute circulatory collapse. The family was informed of his passing, and Roy Disney was the first family member on the scene. Walt's wife and their two daughters, Diane and Sharon, rushed to the hospital. Diane explained, "My mother went to enter the room, and she stopped at the doorway, holding up her hands in shock. I went in and found Dad laying peacefully in bed. My Uncle Roy was sitting at the foot of the bed, massaging Dad's feet. I think he said something like, 'Well, kid, I guess this is goodbye.'" Everyone was in shock. Roy had returned to the studio later that day. He sat on the couch in his office and poured himself a drink. He reminisced to himself about his brother and their life together. No doubt he might have shed a few tears, but as his mind wandered back to the present, he realized that things weren't over. Roy was 73 years old, and he was overdue for retirement. But he thought about the company and all the projects currently in the works. Walt's dreams were now up in the air, and he thought about the more than 4,000 sad and confused employees of the company who would soon be driven into chaos if he had left them now. He sat down at his desk to write out a memo to everyone in the company, assuring them that the company would be continuing on as Walt had guided it, and the various projects that were underway would be completed. There were several projects: the animated movie The Jungle Book, and the new attractions for Disneyland like Pirates of the Caribbean, Haunted Mansion, and the new Tomorrowland. Roy Disney declared at that moment he would oversee the completion of the projects left behind, finishing with Walt's greatest ambition, the Florida project that he called Disney World. In spring of 1967, Florida passed legislation that allowed the Disney property to be a district free from state and county control. Immediately, work began on clearing paths for roads and pumping out water and breaking ground on necessary utilities. A runway was carved out of the forest so the company could easily land their plane to make site visits easier. Walt Disney was very concerned about nature conservation, so Roy knew that construction couldn't be a clumsy invasion of natural swamplands. An organization was put together to oversee the capture and relocation of the wildlife in the swamps prior to draining. A committee carved out designated areas on the property for conservation and protection. A system of canals had been constructed to ensure that the placement of the theme park, hotels, and transportation center didn't cut off water flow to the surrounding swamps. One of the largest canals they built follows the western perimeter of the property for 8.5 miles. About 1,000 feet north of where the new park would go was a large space cleared for backstage facilities. The first thing to start work on was a small power plant that would support the power for the entire resort. The park would require a lot of air conditioning. And the designers took a page from Disneyland's new Tomorrowland project, where instead of using traditional air conditioners, which required massive cooling units fitted with poisonous coolant liquid and loud compressors, they decided to use water for cooling. And the water would be connected to the other air conditioners through a closed plumbing system that pumps warm water expelled from the air conditioners to a main facility that uses large fans to cool the water and sent it back to the park for the air conditioners to reuse. Next, they began constructing facilities for sewage treatment, trash disposal, and water treatment. The sewage treatment facility was placed 3 miles south of the theme park in the middle of the swamp, where tourists couldn't smell or see it. A space was cleared in the forest to build a tree farm where the exotic trees that would decorate the theme park and resorts could take root and begin growing, allowing the trees up to 4 years to mature before being replanted in their final home. During Walt's time, the original plans for the resort area was to have a paved plaza out front of the theme park. But after Walt died, Roy felt that a plaza wasn't grand enough. He wanted people to feel like the journey to the park was an adventure in itself. In his first act of creative direction, he requested the Imagineers to build a lake with the hotels surrounding it, and shores covered in white sand beaches so guests could swim. The advantage of this was that it would help distance the parking lot from the theme park, giving guests the option to either take a ferry across the lake or take a monorail around it, building up that sense of excitement. This wasn't a bad idea. In fact, the overseer of the park construction, Admiral Joe Fowler, a man who was tasked with constructing Disneyland almost 15 years earlier, realized that they could use the dirt excavated to build the park up higher off the ground. When Disneyland began operation, Walt Disney witnessed cast members in various costumes crossing the park to get to their work areas. Their costumes would contradict the themed areas they were walking through. Fowler remembered this, and after collaborating with the Imagineers, they realized they could build a system of utility corridors they termed utilidors under the park, allowing complete access to the major themed lands, so guests wouldn't see the various maintenance and utility vehicles or off-duty cast members. It also would allow employees to gain entry to areas of the park faster than having to rush through crowded guest walkways. At first, the idea of the utilidors proved a problem because the Florida water table sat just 4 feet underground, and it would be dangerous to dig tunnels and constantly hold back the water. Building up the park 14 feet high with soil excavated for the new lake would solve that problem. 8 million cubic yards of dirt was scooped out to create the 200-acre Seven Seas Lagoon. They transported the soil in the wrong order. Fertile topsoil that was dug up was accidentally laid down on the park's foundations first, leaving the nutrient-deficient clay from deep beneath the soil to be laid last, which meant that they missed out on the important nutrients needed to grow the transplanted vegetation. The other upside to raising the park high off the ground was that the bed of the Frontierland River could be built at regular ground level, which means that whenever maintenance needed to be performed on the river, they could simply pull the plug out, if you will, and the water would drain through a canal into the Seven Seas Lagoon. The rivers of America at Magic Kingdom would be home to the Admiral Joe Fowler Riverboat, named after the man who oversaw construction of both Disneyland and Magic Kingdom Park. Another problem that plagued Disneyland was a lack of storage and office spaces. As Disneyland grew, office spaces were built into empty attic areas above parts of Frontierland and Adventureland, as well as above City Hall and the Opera House on Main Street. Main Street itself was selling so much merchandise that there wasn't enough storage space in the back of the buildings to hold extra inventory. Disneyland's Main Street may look multi-leveled, but it's all an illusion. The roofs were only built 16 feet off the ground, allowing a maximum interior ceiling height of 14 feet. And to hide air conditioning and ventilation systems, the fronts of the buildings were constructed at least 6 to 10 feet higher than the roof. This was something they corrected with Magic Kingdom. The buildings here were automatically constructed with 2 levels, offering enough space for storage, break rooms, and offices on the second floor. Imagineers Herb Ryman and Harper Goff were told by Roy that this Main Street had to be the most ideal version of a Victorian town, so the facades were built taller and more extravagant than those at Disneyland. When the conversation about the castle came into discussion, Roy asked Herb Ryman to design a castle so grand and tall that it could be seen like a jewel from across the Seven Seas Lagoon. While Disneyland's castle stood 77 feet above the ground, the one in Florida would tower 189 feet over the park. It would be designed almost entirely out of steel and fiberglass, with its towers being fabricated separately and lifted into place. Cinderella Castle would be built to withstand hurricane-force winds up to 125 miles per hour, the fastest they estimated hurricane winds could get being so far inland. When Walt built Disneyland, he had a private apartment installed above the Main Street Firehouse, so he and his immediate family could spend the night in the park. Roy decided that he too wanted a family apartment in the new park. Though they never got around to building the apartment, they did allocate space for it above the restaurant for future completion. There's no doubt that Walt Disney had a fascination for trains. The Disneyland Railroad was the most popular attraction at Disneyland, and even to this day sees more passengers on average than any single attraction in the park. Walt had left Imagineer Roger Brogy in charge of building his railroad, and Roy would also entrust him with the one for Disney World. Roger put together a team including Jerry Best and Earl Vilmer. They determined that the Disney World Railroad would need locomotives large enough to haul heavier trains than the ones at Disneyland, and they would need to be able to do it on a 2% grade, which was twice as steep. Jerry Best discovered that large narrow-gauge steam locomotives were for sale in Mexico. They were built in the United States as late as 1928 and sold to the Mexican government for use on the Yucatan Railway, hauling loads of sisal hemp, which was made into finely crafted rope. The Mexican government had just recently replaced them with their proud fleet of diesel-electric engines. So, Roger Brogy and Earl Vilmer flew down to the Yucatan to purchase 5 locomotives at a total cost of $32,750. The Mexican officials even let them carry back as much spare parts as they desired. The locomotives were loaded onto cargo trains, and the Mexican government even provided 2 guards armed with shotguns to protect the cargo until it reached the U.S.-Texas border. According to Roger Brogy's son, Michael, American rail fans were notorious for stealing parts off old steam engines. But when they gathered on the tracks to snap pictures of the locomotives, the rail fans knew the cargo was destined for Disney World, and out of respect for Walt, they never laid a hand on the engines. The locomotives arrived at a shipping yard in Tampa, where one of the engines was cannibalized for its spare parts to help restore the other 4. All the boilers were replaced with newer, tapered boilers made by Dixon Boiler Works of Los Angeles, and the restoration of the engines went relatively smooth. The cars that the engines would pull were copied from the excursion train at Disneyland, which was originally designed by Bob Gurr. The original train cars had 13 rows, and with all 5 cars together, the train had a capacity of 325 passengers. For the Disney World Railroad, they would lengthen the car design to 15 rows and add 6 inches to its roof height, and now their 5-car trains could haul 370 passengers. Each of the 4 engines had a train of their own and encircled the park on a 1.5-mile loop. Since before Disneyland opened, Walt had been referring to it as his Magic Kingdom. Even park announcements and merchandise labeled it as such. So when Roy and the executives had to decide on a name for the new park, the answer was obviously the Magic Kingdom. And while Disneyland held its designation as the happiest place on Earth, Magic Kingdom would be designated as the most magical place on Earth. And true to Roy's word, in 1971, the 107-acre Magic Kingdom would dwarf Disneyland's 75-acre size. While the ideas for Epcot would have to be saved for a future date, Roy Disney was adamant that Disney World should open with an operating monorail system. By this point in time, Bob Gurr had designed 3 generations of monorails for Disney, so he went to work designing the 4th generation for Disney World. The Mark IV monorail would appear a lot like the popular Learjet, which visually embodied the look of sleek, futuristic, and speedy design. In 1969, 10 monorails were ordered for the new resort, manufactured by Martin Marietta. They would race around a dual beamway that circled the Seven Seas Lagoon on a 2.8-mile loop, with stops at the Transportation and Ticket Center, the Contemporary Resort, the Park, and the Polynesian Village Resort. When Disney World opened in October of 1971, only 4 out of the 10 monorails were available for service, with 2 more coming online in November and December. The rest of the monorails arrived one by one the next year. The Contemporary Resort Hotel, now known as Disney's Contemporary Resort, was designed by Walt's friend, architect Welton Beckett, the same man who designed the Progress Land Pavilion at the World's Fair. The Contemporary Resort was originally going to be named the Tempo Bay Hotel. The main tower is designed as an A-frame, where its 383 guest rooms were prefabricated and trucked in by freeway, then slid into the building like dresser drawers, hooking up utilities as they went along. The large atrium at the center of the building is called the Grand Canyon Concourse, and at its center is a vertical shaft adorned with a tile mosaic, designed by artist Mary Blair. The Polynesian Village Resort was designed by Welton Beckett as well, and it opened with 484 rooms, built into 8 longhouses, with the 9th building being the largest on the hotel property and housing the main lobby and its restaurants. The guest rooms were also prefabricated and trucked in, though they were stacked on top of each other and bolted into place. While Disney World would open with only 2 hotels, it did, however, have golf courses and even a campground called Fort Wilderness, named after the old log fort on Disneyland's Tom Sawyer Island. Once the beautiful white sand was laid down on the shores of the lagoon, they opened an access channel on the east, which allowed water from Bay Lake to flow into the man-made lagoon. During one of the various meetings about the resort, Roy Disney announced that he was changing the name of Disney World to Walt Disney World, stating, "Everybody knows the Ford car, but not everybody knows it was Henry Ford who started it all. It's going to be Walt Disney World, so people will always know that this was Walt's dream." The grand opening of the resort was quickly approaching, and much like Disneyland's grand opening 16 years earlier, the park wasn't fully completed. Magic Kingdom's Tomorrowland was going to open incomplete with no people mover. Its only attractions would be the Skyway to Fantasyland and the Grand Prix Raceway, which was the modern iteration of Autopia. Fantasyland itself would mostly be ready for opening, except for the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea attraction, which was running 2 weeks behind. Roy could have delayed the park's opening at any point. In fact, he once demanded Walt delay the opening of Disneyland, since it too wouldn't be ready. But Walt was adamant that he gave the public his word, and delaying the opening would only make people second-guess the venture. So Roy continued to insist that nothing would delay the opening of Magic Kingdom. A banner on Main Street Station read, "Remember, opening October 1971, and Roy intended to keep that promise. Opening day had come. The park drew less attendance than expected because word on the street was that the resort would be teeming with crowds. Roy Disney opened Walt Disney World at a cost of $400 million, and the company was without any outstanding debt, unlike Disneyland, which owed $10 million back when it opened. Roy was invited up to the microphone at Town Square, nervous sweat dripping down his cheeks. The attendees could be heard applauding in the background as Roy reached for his glasses. Imagineer John Hench recalled, Roy Disney stood facing the microphone before a crowd of guests ready to deliver the dedication speech at the opening ceremony. He suddenly turned and looked around, and I heard him say quietly, "Somebody go find Mickey for me. We don't have Walt anymore, and Mickey is the nearest thing to Walt that we have left." Mickey appeared, and Roy promptly began his speech, with Mickey standing proudly at his side. Indeed, Mickey understood the gravity of his presence at that moment, and instead of happily waving at guests and jumping excitedly, he stood respectfully, hands folded. Actor and comedian Bob Hope, one of the invited attendees of the opening days, joked, "I must say it's a fantastic achievement. They took a swamp and turned it into a magic kingdom. It wasn't easy. Have you ever tried to relocate 8,000 angry alligators?" Roy had seemingly done the impossible, and in doing so, he honored the memory of his brother. Now that Walt Disney World was open, he felt he could finally slow down. That December, he told his secretary that he would remain with the company for another 18 months to ensure the seamless transition of control to the younger generation of executives. Roy and his wife Edna, as well as his son Roy Edward, were getting ready to attend the Disneyland Christmas Parade on the evening of December 19th. Before leaving, Roy Sr. said that he was feeling very tired and suggested that the other two should take the grandchildren and go without him. When Roy Jr. and Edna returned that night, they found Roy Sr. laying on the floor next to his bed in a dazed state. An ambulance took him to the hospital where he died the next day, December 20th, 1971, of an intracranial hemorrhage. Just 2 months after opening the resort, he was 78 years old. Walt Disney World has captured the hearts of millions of people across the globe. It was part of Walt Disney's greatest ambition, and his legacy was honored by the hundreds of artists and employees that he loved. It wasn't the media empire that built the resort. It was a labor of love from all the people who wished they could have said goodbye to the one man who made their dreams possible. The creation of Magic Kingdom Park is not a story about Walt Disney, but rather a story of a brother who was dedicated to completing the achievements of the other, and a grand gesture of thanks for all the success and love that Walt had brought to Roy's life. Roy Disney was never the creative type the way Walt was. He never involved himself with the creative aspect of the company until that fateful day when his brother died. He then dedicated the rest of his life to finishing what his brother had begun, giving everything he had left, and never quitting. Magic Kingdom Park is a tribute to love and dedication, displayed before you for 50 years, proving that just because you are gone does not mean that you will be soon forgotten. Through the slot between the tracks, you can hear the metallic clinking of a steel cable as it softly grinds against the various sheaves and guide rollers. Rising in the distance, a streetcar appears to defy gravity as it gracefully crests the hill, pulled along the track by its forceful grip on the wire rope beneath the street surface. These are the cable cars of San Francisco. They are part of a system that was first invented here in the city, and are now the last remaining cable streetcar system in the entire world. Cable cars are not to be confused with funicular railways. A true cable car operates along busy streets and are pulled by endless loops of cable that never stop moving, and the cars themselves can detach at will. Funicular railways like the Great Orme Tramway in Wales may look a lot like a cable car, but they are still considered a funicular railway because they are permanently fixed to the cable and rely on the cable itself to start and stop. The story of the San Francisco cable cars is full of tribulation and triumph. They wouldn't be here today if it weren't for the efforts of an outspoken woman named Friedel Klussmann, but her story comes later. First, let us ride the streetcar back in time, to the Victorian era, an age in the city's past when so many new innovations were brought to light. Andrew Smith Halliday came to San Francisco with his father in 1852 after a long voyage from England. They were both inventors, and Andrew's father had a patent for wire rope. They came to the Bay Area hoping, like so many other men during the gold rush, to find gold and make themselves wealthy. After no luck, Andrew's father returned to England the next year, while he himself stayed behind working in gold mines. Occasionally he was hired as a surveyor and bridge builder. In 1857, he abandoned mining and returned to San Francisco to start a new company and manufacture wire rope. His rope was sold to various mining companies around the Bay Area who used his patented Halliday rope tramway. It was an invention that used an endless loop of cable that transported carts of ore great distances. Halliday's wire rope inventions had revolutionized the efficiency of mining operations around the world, but there was yet another issue that continued to tug at him. The city of San Francisco had impossibly steep hills. When the city was first established, the main area of town mostly developed on the flatter areas near the bay. But as the city continued to grow, they had to expand westward, up the hills. Halliday watched as horses struggled to pull carriages and wagons up the city streets, and bore witness to a tragic event where a coachman mercilessly beat his horse as it tried to haul a carriage up the wet cobblestone road. The horse gave out, sending the carriage of passengers and the horse itself tumbling to their doom. Andrew Halliday felt that he could use his tramway invention to build a streetcar system that could safely take passengers up and down the hills. And so he established the Clay Street Hill Railroad and hired engineer William Epplesheimer to help design it. The idea was to install a constantly moving cable ropeway underneath the city street and have special carriages that could grip the cable, allowing it to traverse the hills. On August 2, 1873, Andrew Halliday publicly tested his Clay Street cable car amid a crowd of spectators and successfully ran the coach up and down the hill. A month later, his Clay Street Railroad would open to the public and become one of his most lucrative business ventures. 4 years later, in 1877, the Sutter Street Railroad opened a competing cable car service. They managed to avoid infringing on Halliday's patented designs by altering some of the mechanisms. Again, the new cable car system proved profitable, prompting more companies to open slightly different railways of their own. San Francisco's cable car system reached its peak in 1892, when 12 different cable car lines operated under 7 separate companies. Over 53 miles of cable car tracks had crisscrossed the city, which was somewhat of an urban planning headache. However, with competition comes innovation. As the companies competed with each other, they managed to perfect the cable car technology, making safer, quieter, and smoother rides for their passengers. The current system still operating today is composed of several designs and technologies perfected just prior to the turn of the 20th century from cable car systems around the world. It starts with a single powerhouse located on the corner of Mason and Washington Streets. Inside are the massive rotating motors that turn the 4 endless loops of cables that move the various cable cars down the streets. These wheels are called sheaves. They are designed to keep the cable taut and use friction to pull them. In the past, the sheaves would have been powered by steam engines, but were converted to electricity long ago. The cable cars are able to grab the rope using these grip levers, which extend beneath the slot in the tracks and can grip the cable with a variable force, sometimes thousands of pounds per square inch. When the grip operator wants to get the car rolling, they can gradually increase pressure on the grip until they are satisfied with the speed, and then proceed to tighten the grip so that the car cannot slip from the cable. The cable will always pull the car along at a steady speed of 9.5 miles per hour, or a little over 15 kilometers per hour. The cars usually only stop to pick up passengers in the middle of a street intersection because this is where the ground elevation is level. To come to a stop, the gripman must release the grasp on the cable and start applying brakes using a foot pedal on the floor of the car. This presses brake pads made of wood against the rails to apply friction to slow or stop a car. But if the gripman needs extra stopping power, he can easily apply the secondary brakes, which pushes pads against the wheels themselves. To prevent the instance of a runaway car, there is also an emergency brake, only used as a last resort. The gripman can pull a lever that forces a steel wedge into the slot between the tracks. It is said that the force of this steel wedge is so great that cutting torches would be required to free it from the slot. There are areas of the city where one set of cable car tracks intersects another. This became an issue back in the old days because one company's cable would be allowed on top, but the other company's cable would have to pass below. It was decided that whichever cable car line came after would have to force the cable to dip below the older line. When this happens, a cable car from the newer line must drop the rope from the grip and use its momentum to coast over the crossing. When it gets to the other side, the tracks will dip low enough to allow the gripman to take the rope and continue along. If the gripman fails to let go of the rope before reaching the crossing, the cable will be forced out of the grip, which can damage both the grip and the rope itself. Another interesting innovation is the depression rollers. Since the cable must always be kept beneath the tracks and pulled taut, a set of depression rollers sits at the foot of each incline and pushes down on the cable to prevent it from rising up through the slot. When the grip of the car approaches, it will slam against the push bars over each roller, sliding them out of the way, and as the grip passes, the rollers will snap back into place. When the cabled cars reach the end of the line, they usually let go of the rope and roll onto a turntable. The gripman and the conductor will then turn the car around and push it onto the opposite tracks. The only line that doesn't require turntables is the California Street line, where the cars have grip mechanisms on both ends of the vehicle. When the cars get to the end, they simply drop the cable and coast over a switch track. The gripman and the conductor then reverse their positions, and the car can begin rolling in the opposite direction. For a few decades after their invention by Andrew Halliday, cable car lines opened up in cities across the world, such as Dunedin, New Zealand, Melbourne, Australia, and Glasgow, Scotland. Today, San Francisco is the only city to continue to operate a true cable car system. This might make you wonder what could have happened to the cable car that made it nearly extinct. Well, the Great Earthquake of 1906 dealt the first blow. Many cable car lines were heavily damaged, and the fire that spread throughout the city had leveled many of the various powerhouses that ran the cable cars. The expense of reconstruction was often too much for many of these companies to invest in, so they gave up and sold what assets they had left. The handful of cable car lines that remained were rebuilt because even in 1906, the cable car lines were the most efficient way of getting up the steepest hills. But all that would gradually change in the coming years as motor cars became cheaper and easier to own. As America's car culture expanded, the need for the cable cars began to dwindle. In the year 1912, the same year the Titanic sank beneath the dark waters of the Atlantic, the city of San Francisco established a municipal railway. It had bought out the Market Street cable car line and repurposed it into an electric streetcar line that was operated by the city. It became the first municipal railway in the United States and was criticized by many as an experiment in socialism. But nevertheless, the electric streetcars were popular because they were much faster and more comfortable than cable cars. However, they could never be used on the steep hills and were restricted to the flatter ground. That was until the year 1917, when the municipal railway bought its first motor coach, a powerful vehicle that could haul passengers up any of the city streets at twice the speed of a cable car. Indeed, the Muni motor coach became so popular that by the next year, Muni had 5 of them, with more on the way. And as technology advanced, larger motor coaches made way for city buses. And as the last remaining cable car lines would close down, Muni would swoop in and buy them. In certain instances, Muni would continue to operate cable cars, but more often than not, the assets would be sold off, and the cable car tracks would be ripped out of the streets. In 1947, Mayor Roger Lapham saw that running buses was far cheaper than running cable cars, which led him to state, "The city should get rid of all cable car lines as soon as possible." Lapham was elected as San Francisco mayor because of his ambitions for progress. He was not very sentimental, and saw the cable cars as a hindrance against his ideals of efficiency and progress, and he had a lot of public and private support. But there was one person from which he did not have support. Mrs. Friedel Klussman was a proud citizen of San Francisco, and she was outraged at the thought that city leaders were so quick to remove the city's iconic cable cars. She founded an organization called San Francisco Beautiful, and started a citizens committee, made up mostly of women, dedicated to saving the cable cars. The committee ran a campaign that showed everyone the value of the cable cars. The committee also sent in dozens of letters of protest to city leaders, and they had many different petitions signed by thousands of San Franciscans. Mayor Lapham met with Mrs. Klussman and gave her quite a lecture. The horse car had to go. The cable cars have to go. Waving petitions in the face of progress can no more stop it than could King Canute stop the waves by royal decree. Despite his condescending tone, Mrs. Klussman was not discouraged and continued her opposition. In response, Mayor Lapham ran a campaign against the cable cars, even partaking in a publicity stunt where he had an old horse-drawn streetcar pulled through downtown to poke fun at how antiquated the streetcar system was. Although Mrs. Klussman's campaign to save the cable cars had better results, citizens understood the cable cars were a major tourism draw to the city and a piece of engineering history still around for people to admire. Friedel Klussman and her committee gathered the 40,000 signatures needed to put Measure 10 on the November 1947 ballot, a measure that could preserve the cable cars. The local newspapers started to understand the shift of sides on the argument, and they could see that more and more people were in favor of the old streetcars, and so they began printing stories and articles that supported the efforts for preservation. Across the United States, celebrities like Irene Dunn declared their support. Salvador Dali and even Eleanor Roosevelt praised the San Francisco icons. Letters of support poured in from countries across the globe, including Denmark, Norway, India, England, Guam, Brazil, Mexico, and Canada. A man from post-war Germany wrote in a letter, "Let the would-be abolishers of your cable cars come over to Europe to find out how many good old things have gone, utterly gone. I think men should not deliberately lay hands on such things." The entire city of San Francisco was behind Friedel Klussman, and then it was time to vote on Measure 10, whether to junk or keep the cable cars. Mrs. Klussman waited anxiously as the votes were counted, and soon the answer came. The measure had passed by a landslide. 166,000 votes in favor versus 50,000 votes against. The cable cars were saved, at least for now. Throughout the 50s and 60s, Mrs. Klussman and her committee had to continue fighting off several political and private attempts to destroy the cable cars, but she never backed down. In 1964, the San Francisco cable cars became the first moving National Historic Landmark. The new landmark status added further protection towards keeping the cable car system from destruction. In the 1980s, Mayor Dianne Feinstein had led a rebuild effort to reconstruct what was left of the cable car system and ensure it had proper funding. Mrs. Klussman celebrated the good news. She was an elderly woman by this point in time, but all her efforts to save the cable cars were finally blossoming. Friedel Klussman died in 1986, leaving behind a legacy of preservation for the city's most historic icons. As a show of mourning for her passing, the cable cars were shrouded in black. And 11 years later, in 1997, the turntable at Hyde and Beach Streets was dedicated to her, the woman who fought tirelessly to save the San Francisco cable cars, so we, the future generations, can see and appreciate them. As you can imagine, it's not easy to keep the cable cars running. It requires various skills that just aren't as commonplace anymore. As for driving the cable cars through the streets, that requires prior experience operating Muni transit vehicles. Those that qualify can take a 3-week training course, of which very few people make it past the first day. In 1892, when the cable car systems were at their peak, there were over 600 of them rolling through the city. But now, there are only 45 left in service. Today, the cable cars are mostly used by tourists. They are somewhat of a novelty. After all, the fare to get on them is rather pricey. The COVID-19 pandemic of 2020 had forced the cable cars to close for over a year, but in early July of 2021, they began testing for a summer reopening. The entire system has become iconic for the city and adds to its charm and helps draw in tourists. For some, it is hard to look at the cable cars and see a heart and soul, but if you can peruse the stories of its past, in those pages of history, you will find their beating heart and their glowing soul. From Andrew Smith Halliday's desire to create a safe way for people to climb the hills of the city he loved, to Friedel Klussman's desire to save history and preserve beauty, the streetcars are infused with the hopes, delights, and memories of the very city they serve.
Miles of the world's most heavily traveled monorail. A tree 14 stories tall that's wrapped around an oil rig. Linear synchronous motors that launch a vehicle from 0 to 60 miles per hour in 3 seconds. 9 acres of hidden tunnels. Journey underground, backstage, and backstory at the technological marvel that is Walt Disney World. Next on Modern Marvels.
A vista into a world of wondrous ideas, signifying man's achievement, a step into the future, with predictions of constructive things to come.
Enter a make-believe world spanning some 25,000 acres, and brought to life by cutting-edge technology. What was once swampland now boasts the world's largest resort. The ride technology ranges from space-age centrifuges to the most up-to-date interactive experiences. And hundreds of audio animatronics figures live through the power of pneumatics, hydraulics, and electrical systems.
Our technology in the field of robotics really is evolutionary, beginning 40 years ago, and continues today, building on that.
Walt Disney World Resort is made up of 4 separate theme parks, each with its own innovations and unique resort hotels. Between the theme parks are 2 water parks, Disney's Blizzard Beach and Disney's Typhoon Lagoon. And to the east lies the downtown Disney area, a large shopping, dining, and entertainment district. The first theme park, the 107-acre Magic Kingdom Park, rose from a Florida swamp when Disney purchased thousands of acres of land. The complex contains a labyrinth of tunnels that are the invisible arteries of the park. Transportation, costuming, computer controls, and even a high-speed garbage collection system are all hidden 14 feet below ground. Epcot, which is 3 times the size of the Magic Kingdom, is a never-ending World's Fair, a tribute to science, technology, and world culture. At the entrance soars the 18-story tall Spaceship Earth, a 16 million-pound geodesic sphere glittering with 11,000 facets. An attraction called Soarin' gives visitors the sights, smells, and best of all, the feel of hang gliding over California. And at the end of every day, the illumination show unleashes over 1,000 computer-timed fireworks and sends a 350,000-pound globe spinning across the park's central lagoon.
That particular sequence of pyrotechnic effects had never been attempted before.
Just a few miles away, Disney's Hollywood Studios is a salute to the golden days of Hollywood. The Twilight Zone Tower of Terror is a haunted hotel with one extremely unpredictable elevator. Thanks to an advanced T4 computer program, each plummeting journey is completely different.
The computer will actually decide for you. And associated with that is not only is the motion changed, but all the show elements are changing.
The lights, motors, action extreme stunt show sends lightweight, high-speed cars spinning 540 degrees and sailing off ramps both forward and backward. The newest park, the 500-acre Disney's Animal Kingdom theme park, is almost 5 times the size of the Magic Kingdom. Disney planted 4 million plants to turn a Central Florida cow pasture into an African savanna. And And the park's central icon has a very unusual structural support. An oil rig. On the 100-acre safari ride, African animals look like they're wandering free.
In fact, it is a show set. It's a series of scenes that have been constructed through the manipulation of the landscape environment.
Disney's Animal Kingdom is also home to Expedition Everest. At nearly 200 feet tall, it towers over Disney's other mountains, Thunder, Space, and Splash, and is home to a high-tech, high-speed roller coaster. The 4 parks are all part of this megaplex of a resort. The final vision and crowning achievement of a man who spent more than 40 years expanding the boundaries of technology to create entertainment magic. Walt Disney. Born in 1901, Walter Elias Disney spent his youth in Missouri. From an early age, Walt wanted to be a cartoonist, and by his 20s, he had his own Hollywood animation studio. His partner was his brother Roy, who ran the business side of the operation. From the very beginning, Walt used cutting-edge technology to create more compelling stories. In 1928, he produced Steamboat Willie, the world's first animated talkie. In 1932, he dazzled audiences with Flowers and Trees, the world's first cartoon in Technicolor, and the first to win an Oscar. And with Snow White, he proved that animation was strong enough to carry a feature-length film.
How do you do?
How do you do what?
He was about creating ever increasingly immersive stories. So he took storybooks and created animated films. And in each of those animated films, he continued to push innovative ways to increase the immersion into those films. So stereo sound, color, feature length.
He always hired the best, and Walt was always pushing them to do more and more and plus it, as they said. Plus it in the way that the scenes are done and the way the animation moves. And they did better work than they thought they were capable of.
He may have been an artist, but Disney thought like an engineer. When he wanted to create a greater depth of field in his animated films, and thus a greater sense of realism, he worked with his staff to come up with a solution. In just a few months, they invented and patented a sophisticated animation camera called the multiplane camera.
The individual pieces of artwork are stacked certain distances apart depending on how deep you want the scene to look, and the camera is placed above, and the pieces of artwork are moved in towards the camera to simulate the camera panning through dimensional space.
Walt's next leap in storytelling took him out of the animated studio and into a California orange grove. In the early 1940s, as he sat on a dirty park bench and watched his daughters ride a carousel, Walt had an idea.
There should be something built, some kind of an amusement enterprise built where the parents and the children could have fun together.
He decided to create a place unlike anything the world had ever seen. In 1953, he purchased 160 acres near Anaheim, California. He gathered up some of his most creative talent and dubbed them Imagineers.
On our first television program, we showed you a blueprint for a dream. Well, this is the blueprint, and the dream is Disneyland.
Walt decided early on that the park's various attractions should radiate outward from a convenient central hub. Guests would be drawn to the hub by a dramatic landmark. And given the success of Disney's first feature-length animated film, Snow White, the landmark had to be a castle. This soaring castle would be surrounded by rides themed to Disney movies. Park construction began July 21st, 1954, at a feverish pace.
The early days of the construction of Disneyland seemed sort of like a heartless task. It was nothing but a bunch of orange trees coming down and dirt and bulldozers and chaos and construction equipment and cement trucks. I've never seen so much madness in my life.
The park opened less than 1 year later with all the fanfare Walt Disney could muster. But it was far from his greatest premiere.
It was a disaster. In the first place, Walt could control everything except the weather. And it was one of the hottest days of the year in Anaheim. So the women's spiked heels were sinking into the freshly laid asphalt. They ran out of soft drinks. There were not enough drinking fountains. The rides broke down. Some smart fella counterfeited about 10,000 tickets. And so the place was jammed, and it was a mess.
For the next day, it was like, oh my goodness, we have to go down there again. Everything's broken. We're going to have to take it apart. We're going to have to fix it. And we were in for a long summer.
The summer wasn't that long. After a few weeks of ironing out the kinks, Walt's new park became a smash hit. Every day, thousands of people came to see lifelike animals lurking in the jungle. Jumbos that really flew. And a 5/8 scale Main Street that felt like the real thing. Once again, Walt had succeeded in combining technology with great storytelling.
The theme park is the first experience wherein the audience can actually walk through the frame into the story and participate in that story in a way that was entirely unique. It went from being a passive experience to an active experience.
Disneyland Park was an unqualified success. But Walt still wasn't satisfied. Outside the gates of his carefully constructed make-believe world, a disorganized mass of hotels, motor courts, and diners sprang up, breaking the Disney magic. And inside, practical concerns like garbage collection and employee transportation also spoiled the illusion. Walt knew he could do better, and he vowed to. It was 1964, and something strange was going on in the central part of Florida. Large parcels of swampland near the tiny town of Orlando were being bought up, but nobody knew why, or by whom.
There was a lot of speculation in the Central Florida area as to who is purchasing that much land. Why would they be doing it?
Floridians may have been in the dark, but out in California, Walt Disney knew exactly what was going on. In a secret mission rivaling the best spy novels, he was acquiring land for a massive new theme park that would dwarf Disneyland.
Walt Disney's name was pretty well known to the general public, and certainly if it had been released that Walt was purchasing that much property here in Florida, well, that's certainly going to change the price tag.
Walt chose Orlando because it offered year-round good weather, easy access to major roads, and thousands of acres of land at only $180 an acre. Working under company names like Tomahawk Properties and Latin American Development, Walt and his representatives shuttled in and out of Central Florida, carefully covering their tracks.
He hired attorney Bob Foster to, not under the Disney name, come down and acquire much of the land. Bob would always return to California, traveling through different airports along the way.
Finally, in the fall of 1965, the Orlando newspaper got the scoop. "We Say It's Disney" screamed a huge headline. Neighboring swampland immediately shot up to $1,000 an acre. The Florida Project, all 27,443 acres of it, was out in the open. At a hastily arranged press conference, along with the governor of Florida, Walt announced the huge undertaking. He wasn't just building an East Coast Disneyland. He was creating an entire Disney World, his most ambitious and technologically innovative enterprise ever. The mosaic breezeway beneath Cinderella Castle consists of more than 300,000 hand-laid pieces of colored Italian glass and enamel. In 1966, Walt Disney launched the biggest project of his career. A massive theme park situated in the middle of 27,000 acres in Central Florida.
Well, on this master plan, the theme park and all the other tourist facilities fill just one small area of our enormous Florida project.
Walt envisioned several theme parks, hotels, golf courses, and thousands of acres left in their natural state. His dreams were every bit as big as the acreage he had purchased, but he'd never see these dreams completed. On December 15, 1966, Walt Disney died from cancer.
The first few months after Walt died, it was sort of like, well, Walt's just away. Walt's just away for a while. Walt will be back for vacation, and then we'll get on with the next things that we're going to do.
The Disney company was devastated. Without their charismatic leader, many felt Disney World couldn't be built.
It took us about a year to convince Roy O. Disney and the rest of the management of the Walt Disney Company that there was a lot of talent here that had worked with Walt Disney for many years and that we could do this project.
But the Magic Kingdom Park didn't happen with a wave of the wand. It was more like a military conquest. In fact, the battle to build Walt Disney World and the Magic Kingdom was commanded by a Navy admiral and an Army general. General Joe Potter had overseen the operation of the Panama Canal and the 1964 World's Fair. And Admiral Joe Fowler had built Disneyland Park for Walt a decade before.
They were perfect for the job. Joe Fowler was especially perfect from a construction standpoint because he understood how to work with the Imagineers and all the creative talent and all the engineers.
Their first challenge was to convert hundreds of acres of swampy land into rolling hills and sparkling waterways. They started by digging into Bay Lake, 400 acres of reeds, muck, and swamp grass, lined with 14 feet of rotted roots.
They drained the lake and went down and dug out a good layer of muck and mire that was down at the lake bottom.
After 18 months of moving more than 8 million cubic yards of dirt, the largest private construction project in the country, they were ready to pour concrete. But the concrete work wasn't for any of the landmark structures visitors today would recognize. In fact, it wasn't for structures any guests were ever supposed to see. Back during the early days of Disneyland Park, Walt once saw a Frontierland cowboy sauntering through Tomorrowland, which utterly destroyed the futuristic sci-fi mood. To avoid that kind of culture clash at Walt Disney World, the Imagineers designed a network of tunnels to service the park. They were called utilidors, utility corridors. Because the water table in Central Florida is only 2 feet below ground level, the Imagineers built the utilidors on top of the ground rather than under it.
They are on ground level. They are the first floor of the Magic Kingdom. Then the Magic Kingdom Park was built on the second and third stories on top of that.
The Magic Kingdom is actually 14 feet above where the original elevation was.
The utilidors made it possible to walk from one end of the park to the other in just 10 minutes without being seen by guests. The utilidors also hid many of the mundane operations that could break the Disney magic.
They have office buildings, facilities, wardrobe, cafeteria.
The tunnels also housed an underground trash collection system, one of the world's biggest vacuum cleaners.
Our engineers found the Swedish system, the AVAC system, which we incorporated to collect trash pneumatically. You know, like those old department store things where the cashiers would take something and put it in a tube and send it off. It works the same way, and the trash goes from specified points to a central collection area.
With the site prep and underground foundations laid by General Potter's Army, Admiral Joe Fowler was ready to start building the park itself. His biggest challenge would be what Walt had envisioned as the crowning structure at the Magic Kingdom Park, a towering Cinderella castle. But the castle couldn't be too tall, because Florida law required a flashing red light on any structure higher than 200 feet. Fowler's contractors ordered 600 tons of structural steel and began assembling the castle skeleton. Day by day, the girders rose, hoisted into the Florida sky by giant cranes. To speed the progress, they prefabricated sections of the castle. Not just steel framework, but complete towers and turrets, 18 in all. While on the ground, they were sheathed in fiberglass panels molded to look like stone. Real gold topped 3 of the towers. The highest tower of Cinderella Castle was hoisted and fastened in place 18 months after it was begun, in July of 1971. The castle topped out at 189 feet, just below Florida's height limit of 200 feet. But Disney's Imagineers wanted the Magic Kingdom's castle to look much higher, so they worked a little magic of their own. Optical magic.
Force perspective is a technique that's been used in filmmaking for many, many years, and it's where you'll take a building and you will scale it differently up close to you. So if you've got a building that's maybe several stories tall, then the windows and the framework will get smaller and smaller. That gives the illusion that the structure is actually bigger than it really is, or further away than it may actually be.
On October 1st, 1971, Roy Disney unveiled Cinderella Castle and the rest of the Magic Kingdom to a crowd of 10,000 people. Unlike Disneyland's opening 15 years earlier, the event ran like clockwork, proof of both Walt's vision and the Imagineers' technical achievements. Summit Plummet at Blizzard Beach Water Park is the fastest, tallest single-person water slide in the world. When Walt Disney World opened in 1971, it seemed like the entire East Coast funneled straight into the theme park. Attendance hit 10 million in less than 2 years. People came by the carload to see popular attractions like Jungle Cruise, It's a Small World, and the Hall of Presidents. Like their counterparts at Disneyland Park, they all had one thing in common. They featured what many people consider Walt's greatest legacy, his audio animatronics figures. And they owed their existence to the 1964 New York World's Fair. Back in 1961, when Walt Disney heard that a World's Fair was being planned for New York City, he contracted with several major companies to create rides for the fair.
Walt wanted to be able to develop this, and there was a way to get the sponsorship and some of the money to help develop the ideas that he had.
One idea he'd been working on for years was robotic characters, which he called audio animatronics figures.
He had visions to where he could build a mechanical, electrical machine and then turn it into a life form that looked realistic and moved you out of that illusion of, well, it's not a machine, but it's got character and it's real and it comes alive.
Walt had built several pneumatic AA figures into the Enchanted Tiki Room show at Disneyland Park.
What made it so unique was that all the surprises, that you'd be sitting and all of a sudden the drums would come and the tiki pools would start to animate. And then, of course, the finale when the orc gets up and stuff and starts singing.
Everything in that theater comes to life. And that was very similar to what he used to do in his animated films, where flowers would sing, and birds would talk, etc., and buildings would come to life.
But Walt wanted more. He wanted lifelike human AA figures. For years, his Imagineers had been struggling to create an audio animatronic figure of Walt's favorite president, Abraham Lincoln.
We wanted to bring to the people of today the inspiring words of the man who held this nation together during its moment of greatest crisis, the Civil War.
When Walt started pitching ideas to the World's Fair, one of the World's Fair officials, Robert Moses, was fascinated.
Robert Moses said, "I won't open the fair without Mr. Lincoln."
The trouble was, Lincoln was nowhere close to being operational. The simple system that ran the Tiki Birds wasn't advanced enough for Lincoln. To make him seem human, he would need a far more complex mechanism, and it would have to be packed into a very small space. Lincoln's skull, to be precise. As the fair drew closer and closer, Lincoln still wasn't ready.
Walt was very, very upset with it, and he told me, he says, "Bobby, I want twice as many motions and half as much weight. Not having ever designed humans or animals, it was like a whole new thing, but which we're used to doing whole new things. I immediately saw it as an airplane fuselage with small bearings, small steel framework, and in 90 days I laid out the entire design.
Lincoln was given an internal framework with 13 main structural units, all moving in dozens of directions. The articulated motions were powered by large pneumatic servo cylinders. Early tests proved the design could work. Still, there were problems.
Walt was pulling out some of the dignitaries from the state of Illinois to where they could come out and preview what Mr. Lincoln was going to look like. Mr. Lincoln stood up and he started giving his speech. And at that time and frame, our hydraulic fluids were red in color. Unfortunately, when he was doing his show, we blew a hydraulic line in the torso of Mr. Lincoln, and all of a sudden he collapsed, and we had this red dye fluid started to leak through his white shirt. Some of the dignitaries in the audience said, "Oh, you recreated the assassination of Mr. Lincoln," and Walt wasn't very pleased about that. So from that point on, we had to use clear hydraulic fluid.
He made his debut with the World's Fair in April of 1964 to a stunned audience.
There were reports at the New York World's Fair that Mr. Lincoln got up off the stage and shook hands with people. But from the Imagineers that I talked to who were there, that never happened. And he essentially was bolted to the floor for the duration of his run.
Just resonated with people in a way that left them very enthusiastic, not only about Mr. Lincoln, but about seeing entertainment robotics in general.
Now that they could make human figures, Disney's Imagineers created hundreds of AA figures.
They were traditionally hydraulic or pneumatic figures. This means that they have either fluid going through tubes at high pressure, that's hydraulic, or pneumatic is air going through tubes at varying pressure.
As the air or fluid flowed at varying pressures, it triggered the actuators, the mechanisms that cause the automatic motions.
We have what we call Rotax, which is short for rotary actuators. They do a rotary motion of a wrist twist or torso twist. And we have linear actuators that will do a linear motion.
Actuators powered even the tiny facial movements that make AA figures so convincing.
We have an actuator that we call a pinch actuator, and it pinches the corner of the lips. That when you pronounce certain words, the corners of your mouth will pinch. And then the actuators down up the side is what we call the smile actuators. So when those actuators move up and down, they actually pull the lips back and give the look of the figure smiling. Up at the eyes, we have an actuator that can either be digital or analog. That will give you eyes right or left. If they're digital, they're spring-loaded and they will come back to center each time. If they're analog, they will go from point A to B, and we can stop them and control them any range and point we want.
Better control and thus greater realism was always the goal for AA figures. But in the early days of Disney World, that realism required a trade-off in speed.
If we wanted to move the Armstrong real fast, what would happen was the figure would stop and then it would shake and resonate and go all the way through the whole figure. It looked very unnatural. So what we would do is we had to slow that function down to where it looked fluid and more natural and not resonate and shake. So we always had to sacrifice speed for control, which drove the animators crazy because they wanted speed and still have control.
The Imagineers created a breakthrough in audio animatronics figures in the 1980s. By adding a new circuit called compliance, they were able to control the amount of force pushing or pulling on a movement.
We have built-in compliance in the human body to where when my brain says stop, maybe the inertia makes my arm overshoot a little bit and then comes back to where I told it to stop. You know, but it looked very natural because that's how the human body works. We did the same thing with an electronic circuit in either pressure transducers or a mechanical Hall effect sensor. We can get that fast speed now, and then it will naturally overshoot and come back. That looks very realistic and, you know, fluid like the human body. So with that new technology, we're able to make figures almost look just like us, sometimes even better.
Today, the AA figures at the Magic Kingdom Park populate dozens of attractions, from shows like the Hall of Presidents, where Abe Lincoln still stands and talks,
For 1,000 generations, rejoice.
to adventures like the Jungle Cruise, Each attraction is a precision-timed combination of soundtrack, which includes music, dialogue, and sound effects, and AA figures motions. The complex animated characters are controlled by the Digital Animation Control System, or DAX. It's located in the climate-controlled rooms in the tunnels beneath the Magic Kingdom. Electrical cables that run through the tunnels connect the programs to the shows, enabling technicians to run the shows from a remote location.
Each one of these is a flash memory card that contains all of that data in a non-moving and non-volatile format, so there are no moving parts. As the chip plays, it hands off to the next one, and then hands off to the next one, and so forth, until we have a complete message. We're able to patch into the cards to monitor their performance.
It's time to respond. Send us a message from somewhere beyond.
Today, a small army of audio animatronics characters populates the Magic Kingdom Park, some 1,100 in all. It's the kind of creativity and technology Disney's Imagineers would put to work yet again when they tackled their next park. Expedition Everest's three-story Mandir, a pagoda-type building, was hand-carved with 1,000 Yeti images in Nepal, then shipped, aged, and reassembled at the Cirque Zong site. Epcot is a 300-acre park with two very distinct personalities. One side is a futuristic world dominated by the 180-foot-tall spaceship Earth, one of the biggest geospheres anywhere on our geosphere. At the other end of the park, 11 foreign pavilions ring the World Showcase Lagoon. Given Disney's history with World's Fairs, it's no coincidence.
Epcot is a permanent World's Fair, if you will.
When Disney Imagineers broke ground on Epcot in 1979, they were once again launching the biggest construction project in the United States. 3,000 designers, 22 construction companies, 500 subcontractors, and more than 10,000 workers took on the job. Much of their labor went into constructing Spaceship Earth, a ride inside a giant sphere that was much more challenging to build than the castles that anchored Disney's other parks.
Epcot was a world theme, and we wanted to somehow express that. And so a sphere, looks like the globe of the world, much more so than a golf ball, as it's been called from time to time. But it's a very fascinating, complicated building.
Spaceship Earth is the world's first geodesic sphere. Its outside surface is 150,000 square feet, and its inside volume is 2,200,000 cubic feet. The giant sphere is held up by 6 legs, each of which is supported by pylons driven 120 to 185 feet into the ground. At its lowest point, the sphere stands 18 feet off the ground.
We actually hired MIT to engineer and test the wind loads to make sure that it wouldn't become underneath there a wind tunnel that would knock people over.
The sphere is made of more than 11,000 triangles of alucobond, a thermal polyethylene core bonded to aluminum. 1-inch spacing between the panels allows them to expand and contract in the Florida heat. The spacing also prevents the sphere from becoming a huge waterfall when it rains. Water flows between the panels into a gutter system that empties into the World Showcase Lagoon. But Spaceship Earth is hardly the only engineering marvel at Epcot. Connecting Epcot to the Magic Kingdom is Disney's most famous and futuristic mode of transportation, the monorail.
People still look to the monorail as sort of a vision of future transportation. Visualize a bus on a highway and it had wheels on the bottom. Then you put that up on a concrete road in the sky, and maybe it's 2 feet wide. So you take some other wheels and you put them on the side of this concrete road. That keeps it upright.
Disney didn't invent the monorail. It was first patented in the 1820s in Great Britain. But Walt gave the monorail a futuristic makeover.
You remember the Buck Rogers rocket ship where it had a long pointed front? It had these splayed fins along the side like ski runners, but it had this big wraparound windshield and little portholes, and I thought, that's it. That's all we got to do is do that shape, and it'll hide the wheels. Sketched it up real quick, came in, made a bigger drawing of it, then a rendering of it. Walt took one look at the rendering and said, can you build that?
They could indeed. The original Disneyland monorail, which gave its first ride to Vice President Richard Nixon in 1959, ran on a track only 4,200 feet long, more a carnival ride than a transportation system. For Walt Disney World, though, Imagineers scaled up the monorail to provide serious transportation.
Walt Disney World, we needed a longer train, so we took basically what I call the original Mark III design that we put into service here in 1968, and we made it wider and we made it longer, and I designed a new body to go on that train that had this sort of Learjet sweeping windshield look to it.
In 1990, the monorail was upgraded again.
It's a fiberglass composite body on a steel frame. And the fiberglass body is built under the same premise as an aircraft body. So the entire body itself, without any equipment on it, weighs about 800 pounds because the weight was a big consideration. They didn't want to increase the weight, but they wanted to increase the capacity, and that's how they did it with the composite body.
The new fleet of 12 trains, each made up of 6 cars, increased capacity by 30%. The monorail now carries 50 million people a year. Unlike most conventional trains, which have a single locomotive that pulls all the other cars, each of the monorail trains contains 8 electrical motors, putting out 113 horsepower apiece. They're powered by a 600-volt DC electrical system, which feeds current through an electrified metal bar running the length of a beamway.
It's a large toy electric train. So it picks up power off the beam and powers DC motors.
It's certainly the most expensive toy train in the world. Building the high-tech, high-rise system cost a staggering $1 million per mile for the 14-mile route. And that's in 1970s dollars. Part of the route runs directly through the lobby of the Contemporary Hotel. But the monorail slips in and out so quietly that the hundreds of guests are never disturbed. Try that with a diesel locomotive. Daily servicing takes place in the monorail maintenance facility.
We actually have 3 sections in the shop called drop-out beams, one on beam 1 and one on beam 10. It's actually pieces of beam that scissor down, drop out, and we can roll them out of the way so we can service items under the train.
Because of the continuous preventive maintenance, the monorail is amazingly reliable.
We run at about 99.9% efficiency. On our bad months or bad weeks, we run about 99.8%.
Since Walt Disney World Resort first opened, the monorail has hauled over 1 billion riders, making the system the most heavily used monorail in the world. Since 1971, the total miles logged by Walt Disney World monorail trains would be equal to more than 30 round trips to the moon. High-tech transportation abounds at Epcot. The monorail, fast track driving, even a trip into outer space. But one of its newest rides uses high-tech motion-based technology to give people a chance to experience something considerably lower tech. Hang gliding.
A sensation that is almost like free flight. It is such a unique experience.
We were able to tell a compelling story with high technology and some unique illusions.
Strapped into bench seats, guests are lifted 40 feet into the air and immersed in a movie shot while hang gliding over California. They feel the breeze, smell the scents, bob and soar with the wind. It's a stunning combination of movie and ride technology. But the project almost died on the drawing board. Disney Imagineers knew they could make a great movie. After all, they'd been in the movie business for decades. The real challenge was in engineering the ride.
One idea was, if you think of going to your dry cleaners and when your clothes go by in a moving rack, we were going to do something like that where you'd be in a flying harness, sort of suspended and moving along.
Most of the early concept involved a multi-story building where we had different levels, and we would load people on those floors, and then we would move them horizontally out into the projection area. Very soon we realized that that was going to be too cumbersome. It really wouldn't work. It was about to sink the attraction.
Then, over Thanksgiving weekend, Imagineer Mark Sumner had an idea. To test it, he dug out one of his childhood toys.
I came up with a relatively simple geometrical concept. So I went up on my attic and I found an old toy. It was an erector set that I got when I was about 11 years old. And I brought it down the attic, blew the dust off, and in about 3 hours, I was able to build this model.
Back at work on Monday, he sprang his idea on the planning team.
We could load people on one level. We could turn electric motor, and we could then bring them up into a viewing position. Since we had the motor, maybe we could move them up and down as well. We could perhaps swing them back and forth with another mechanism. And when the show was over, we could simply reverse the motor, bring them down, and let them unload in the normal theater environment.
And that's just what they did, on a much, much bigger scale.
It takes about 1 million pounds of steel to build Soarin'. The other big difference is I have to crank this one by hand. Fortunately, we have electric motors these days. I don't have to stand at the park all day cranking this up and down.
It lifts you up into place very, very quickly. And as soon as you get up, you are surrounded by imagery. You're surrounded. It's an 80-foot wide screen that really starts to make you feel like you're in the middle of the scenery.
We essentially put people on the end of a big arm, and we have to lift this arm up into the theater dome. That weighs about 37 tons, the part that we move. And to do that, we depend on 500 horsepower electric motors, associated gearboxes and pulleys and wire ropes.
But the heavy-duty engineering is all about ultra-light flight.
The intent is we have all this horsepower and all this weight, but we still want it to feel like the guest is floating, that they don't think they're on this very big, heavy mechanical device.
To enhance the realism of the ride, to plus it, as Walt used to say, they added subtle touches like wind and scent to match the movie scenery.
We have an overhead aluminum wing that is in up position when you board so you don't hit your head, and just as you leave the ground, it comes down. And inside the wing, we have an individual fan for each person and a series of chambers inside the wing that will redirect the air and blow it right on your face. And we can change the speed of that fan to correspond with what you're seeing in the show.
And over certain scenes, you smell the orange groves, you smell the ocean, you smell the pine trees. We really try to work on all your senses, or a lot of your senses. This is not a passive experience, and I think you get lost in it.
Now it's one of the most popular attractions at Epcot. Night after night, 365 days a year, Walt Disney World explodes with fireworks. In fact, the resort is the world's largest consumer of fireworks, burning through roughly 1 million shells a year. At Epcot, the nightly fireworks show fires off 1,105 individual shells. They're launched from 750 mortar tubes and 56 firing modules located at 34 positions around the lagoon. Most of them, though, are launched from 4 floating barges, which are loaded early each morning in a backstage lagoon. But this show is much more than fireworks. Music, lasers, jets of fire, fountains, and a 28-foot globe combined to create an aerial display unlike any other.
One of the fascinating things for me about this show is the ability for everything to work together electronically and for the precision timing that you can achieve during the fireworks show.
An array of 26 computers runs the show. The pinpoint choreography is made possible by electronic firing switches that launch the fireworks, and timed fuses that ignite them in the air. Disney is also using a new technique, compressed air.
Air launch replaces that
black powder bag with compressed air. So it's actually like a giant pea shooter. And we shoot the shell up into the sky using compressed air. Because we are using compressed air, we can control the amount of pressure, and the amount of pressure determines how high the shell will go.
Once the shell is airborne, another layer of even more sophisticated technology kicks in. An electronic chip on each shell controls its explosion with split-second precision. Down below, the 150,000-pound Inferno barge shoots blasts of flame so huge that spectators can feel the heat.
We have liquid propane that we store on board the Inferno barge. And again, that's a lot of firepower, so we had to figure out how to do that safely. The idea was to make it a pontoon-style barge and put the propane tanks down under the water, so there's no risk of them catching fire or getting overheated during the show.
4 fountain barges fitted with a total of 160 water nozzles pump 16,000 gallons of water per minute in the form of columns that dance and leap as high as 40 feet. But the undisputed star of the show is the most complex piece of show equipment ever built by Disney's Imagineers. The Earth Globe is the world's first and only spherical LED video screen. 15,000 individual LEDs on the globe's continents splash up nearly 300 images of art, nature, and humanity, all synced to the show's music and narration. On board the barge are 6 computer processors that generate the video signals, fire off the 258 strobe lights, and control the globe's other special effects. The barge made its debut in 2000. The string of lights surrounding the Epcot World Showcase pavilions is more than 26,000 feet long, enough to span the Golden Gate Bridge 6 times over. By the 1980s, with the attendance at both the Magic Kingdom Park and Epcot swelling, Disney Imagineers decided to create another theme park. Once again, they set out to surpass their earlier work, to plus it, as Walt would say. And once again, they took their inspiration from Walt himself. They returned to his roots in the motion picture business and created Disney's Hollywood Studios.
It's everything about show business, how it's done, nostalgic tribute to it. It's about Hollywood, it's about Broadway, it's about radio, it's about television, and especially movies.
At Disney's Hollywood Studios, the Imagineers set out to create their most technologically complex ride to date. They wanted to combine a haunted hotel setting with a dramatic sensation of falling. The result was a haunted elevator ride with a mind of its own. The Twilight Zone Tower of Terror.
There's nothing more fearful, I think, for many people than the notion of an elevator, out of control.
Creating this thrill ride required groundbreaking technology, combining 2 different types of rides into one.
It was one of the most ambitious from a technical standpoint that we've ever undertaken. If you think about a normal ride, it's one ride system. We have multiple motions.
The ride begins with a smooth ascent. But then the doors open and the ride vehicle moves horizontally into the dark corridors of the haunted hotel.
We have a completely different ride system that moves them horizontally in the attraction.
Creating the horizontal movement was easy enough. Disney turned to a technology they'd used before to control vehicles without operators, tracks, or rails. Wire-guided vehicles.
The vehicle is actually equipped with a sensor plate underneath here that rides very close to the floor surface, and it picks up computer signals from the wire to guide the vehicle, wire guidance system, to guide the vehicle along this path. It tells it speed, direction, it reverses forward, it actually even turns to the side. So there's a lot of signals that can be transmitted between the two that actually tell the vehicle how to move in its positioning.
Then suddenly, the ride seemingly lurches into a series of hair-raising lifts and drops.
We built this ride system that would move you up and down very quickly. And we take this very controlled ride system and make you think it's out of control.
The Twilight Zone Tower of Terror opened on July 22nd, 1994, to piercing screams and rave reviews. But the designers couldn't help asking, how can we plus it?
One of our executives asked how difficult it would be if we wanted to make an adjustment on the ride profile. And our programmer said it wouldn't be that difficult at all. And suddenly a light bulb went off, and we realized, wait a minute, we have created an attraction that can be reprogrammed.
In 2002, Disney unveiled a fourth version of the ride. They called it T4, adding the ominous tagline, "The tower is in control." 2 years, countless calculations, and several computer upgrades in the making, T4 includes 6 to 8 drops and lifts of various heights. But the exact number and the sequence are generated randomly inside the computer. Each ride is different.
Not only is the motion changed, but all the show elements will change. You'll see different shows, you'll see different audio, different lighting techniques.
The attraction quickly became one of the most popular in all of the Walt Disney World resorts. Just around the corner from the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror is ride technology of a totally different sort. The Rock and Roller Coaster is to conventional coasters what an F-18 Hornet is to a single-engine prop plane. Instead of slowly hauling its way up a long, slow climb, this coaster takes off like a rocket.
It launches guests in the Super Stretch limo from 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds. And you're immediately going into an inversion. You got some moves, you got some surprises on the dark, but at the same time you're seeing landmarks zipping by. It's about speed, it's about thrill, and it's about music. It's combining all three into one experience.
The Rock and Roller Coaster's launch system is actually a series of powerful electromagnets synchronized to pull the car forward at ever-increasing speeds. Called linear synchronous motors, the technology is now being explored by the Navy as a better way to catapult planes off of aircraft carriers, and by NASA as a more efficient way to launch space vehicles. Linear synchronous motors, or LSMs, accelerate the firing of the electromagnets along the track, turning a plodding magnetic ripple into a screaming tsunami. And anything surfing that tsunami can be accelerated to a speed limited only by the bursts of electrical current and the physical limits of the ride vehicles and its control systems.
There's so much power you can get out of a linear motor. With a linear motor, you can literally be magnetically squirted out into space with no chain or anything. That's the big advantage of linear motors.
Whether you're in the first car or the last, the songs match the scenery.
Each onboard audio system also has unique sensors on the ride vehicles, and they correspond with cues that are given along the ride path. And that tells the system what tracks to play. It's a pretty complex matrix of amplifiers and speakers and crossovers. So we're separating highs, mid-ranges, and lows. You can tell that there's speakers right beside your head, almost like an earphone, and there's subwoofers underneath your seat, so you're really immersed in this audio experience.
Disney holds more fireworks manufacture patents, laser imaging patents, and launch patents than any other organization. When the Disney Imagineers were planning Disney's Hollywood Studios theme park, they knew they wanted to stage stunt shows. But the question was, how? They had plenty of experience designing and building things like roller coasters and monorails and audio animatronics figures, but those were all pre-programmed and highly controlled. How could they bring that level of control and precision to something as kinetic and unpredictable as a car chase?
How can we make this something that can perform day in and day out and be very consistent?
And inventing and building the technology to make such an attraction possible was only the beginning.
A lot of science went into designing the way we're going to stage everything.
The Imagineers began building a 177,000 square foot arena that included a 5,000-seat stadium. First, they poured concrete footers 4 feet deep to support bridges and ramps. Beneath it all, the Imagineers buried a pit big enough to hold liquid propane.
We do have a pit that all the accumulators are for the LP gas, which are fed from a fuel farm, which holds propane, which fuel these accumulators.
Most of that firepower would be reserved for the show's planned finale, a spectacular display of stunts, thrills, and explosions.
We have a finale, which is 6 large compressed LP gas accumulators that blow off that put about a 45 to 65 foot fireball in the air for the finale.
Once the stage was underway, the Imagineers went to work on the ride vehicles. Although in this case, the vehicles wouldn't be ridden in by visitors. They'd be operated by stunt drivers. Because of all the jumping and spinning they would have to do, the cars needed to be lightweight. So the Imagineers took cars and stripped them down to custom chassis. The goal was a car weighing just over 1,000 pounds, about a third as much as a regular sedan. To keep the weight down, but provide the acceleration the cars would need, they installed a lightweight 1,300cc motorcycle engine that puts out about 152 horsepower. This engine provides maximum power at a minimum weight.
We have a firewall which protects the driver, as well as we have an external alternator to charge the system, 2 large fans to cool air from this compartment out the backside of the car, and we also cool our oil to the engine to keep it